Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Assembly Committee on Ways and Means and the Senate Committee on Finance, or Subcommittee on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation. Good morning in Carson, good morning in Vegas, and if anybody's on the line, you're committed, good for you. All right, good morning too. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Assemblymember Anderson. Present. Assemblymember Brown-May. Here. Assemblymember Dickman. Here. Assemblymember Hibbets. Here. Assemblymember Mosca. Here. Senator Nguyen. Senator Titus. Here. Assemblymember Watts. Here. Chair Taylor.
I am present. Thank you very much, and please mark Senator Nguyen here when she arrives. All right, good morning. We have the department, which is right now. Say here. Rochelle, say here. Here. Here, all right, there we go. Now we're good. Okay, this morning, and they're here before us, ready to go. We have the Department of Transportation. We have 3 budgets before us today, so we will turn it over to you. Oh, let's do a little housekeeping. Forgot about that. If you're here and you're going to make any kind of testimony, please make sure you've signed in and give the secretary your business card. If you have one, please silence all electronic devices. And please, if you're going to make a public comment, which we'll do at the end of the meeting, please make sure you state your name for the record, spell your last name if you would, so we can make sure our minutes are accurate and reflect really what happened here in the meeting. And then finally, if you want to call in and give public comment or testimony, that number is 888-475-4499, and the meeting ID this morning is 853-4542-1804. And just as a reminder, committee members often use our laptops to follow along, look at exhibits and so on, so please don't take that as a sign of inattention or the lack of respect. Now we will turn it over to our Director Larkin, right there in the middle. Good morning. Go ahead and begin when you're ready.
Thank you. My name is Tracy Larkin Thomason, TracyLarkinThomason. I'm the Director for the Nevada Department of Transportation. I'm pleased to be in front of you this morning.
Director Larkin, can you move that? Can you get you have such a soft voice.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Just do the
always
best
say
you
I'll
can.
use my yell at the kids voice.
Yeah, you use your kids are in trouble voice. I know that mother voice, so
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right, on my right is Sandra Rosenberg. I'm my Deputy Director for Planning and Administration, and to my left is Felicia Denny, Assistant Director, Administration Services. So I'll jump right in. Today, we're just going to go over a little bit of background, and then budget account 4660, Transportation Administration, budget account 463, Bond Construction, and budget account 4659, the AB 112, Wildlife Crossings. So in the UNDAP background, we were established in 1917. Our headquarters is located here in Carson City, where most of our administrative, engineering, and engineering support services are located. We are divided into 3 districts statewide, generally with a district engineer and assistant engineers in each. District 1 is Southern Nevada, consisting of Clark, Nye, Lincoln, Mineral, and Esmeralda, with the headquarters in Las Vegas. District 2 is Northwest Nevada, Lake Tahoe, Reno, Sparks, and it goes about over to Lovelock and south to Hawthorne. And then District 3 is all the rest of the state, so it's a very wide thing. We go around, we have about 42 maintenance stations across the state. So we cover all the areas remotely, and that's where obviously a lot of the taking care of the roads, sweeping, plowing, et cetera, are done. We like to say that we are more than just roads. When I started with the department many years ago, I thought it's like, you blade a little bit off, throw a little asphalt on it, you're good to go. I've learned a lot over the years. We basically have weather and natural disaster part on there. We do multimodal transportation systems. We have rural transit. We inspect the airports, the rural airports around the state. We do multi-state coordination, so we work particularly with Arizona, California, and Utah on corridor management, particularly the I-15 and the I-80. Particularly when we have incidences on either side, we have to mitigate the traffic and also work with them to clear traffic. We do economic development and support. A lot of that is transportation is one of the number one things needed for economic development. And so we like to work with our partners around to see where we can work together with them as partners. Some of the things as we move along over the years that we put this aside, and many of you have seen this slide a few times, but trash, homelessness, abatements, theft, and vandalism, this has now become an item of its own within there. We spend about $30 million a year on trash pickup, homeless abatement, and copper wire theft. So associated theft with vandalism. And I'm not sure, the homeless population has doubled in Reno, and in Vegas it's increased by 20% in just the last year. So it's at a 13% high. And the numbers continue to rise. And it's just a statement of this has now become part of some of what we do, but I also need people to realize this means the cost for taking care of this type of thing comes right off the top of our budget. It comes straight out of the state highway funds, and $30 million is equivalent to, depending on where you are in the state, 3 to 5 passing lanes or half an interchange. So now when we talk about major projects and studies, Brightline, the high-speed rail that will connect Las Vegas to Los Angeles. This one is moving forward greatly, and actually this is one that is kind of positive news because they have the $3 billion is still secured. This project is still popular in DC, and they did just close on $2.5 billion in public activity bonds. They have another 2.5 that they will be able to utilize later, and they have $6 billion on venture capital. So we have reached the threshold of looking at basically it being fully funded at the price that they were discussing of $12 billion. Then we talked about the Henderson interchange. This will progress following the design bid build. We are working closely with the Henderson. Obviously, it's no secret that we had the design build out there, which we ended up canceling that project at the end when bids came in literally twice as high as we were expecting. And so on that, we are working on doing different phasings and working very closely with the city of Henderson, discussing what are the most pressing needs to address first on that area. We're looking at US 395 Phase 1 that's currently under construction. That's the North Valleys, north on 395 north of Reno. Phase 2 is scheduled to advertise later on this year. Where it has an $89 million grant in it, and that requires about 21% match of state highway. The current project estimate is between 2 to 250, so a state match requirement of 42 to 53 million. This is one of the ones we're watching very closely because we are at this point unsure of if that grant is secured. We have not received confirmation on it. If it is not, this project will be deferred. The Ely Complete Street project, that started actually in construction out in January. We'll have a kind of a meet and greet out there at the end of April. That has a $24 million grant, which is secured, and a $5 million earmark, again secured. All the formula funds just are secure. The earmarks are considered secure, and we are watching the other grants that have not been obligated yet very closely. The I-80 widening from Vista to USA Parkway, that's 3 lanes in both directions. It was recently awarded 2 federal grants, one in the amount of $250.5 million and the second for 25, for a total of $275 million. The current estimated range for this project is about $600 million. That requires 20% required highway fund and other matching funding. We are watching this one closely. We're feeling fairly positive about this one because I-80 is a national freight route. It is, it's one that really, for military mobility, supply chain management, and real-time management of incidents things, it's critical to not only Nevada but the other states surrounding it. And then other than this, other construction, we're working on long-term projects. We have the I-15 South feasibility study, which goes from State Line up to Sloan, looking very closely at the growth that's going on there so that we can best determine where the access points need to be. That also has the bright line alignment in it, so it's very critical that we only have one lifeline into Las Vegas. It's very critical we get it right for access. We also have the Via Nobila interchange, Neon Phase 2, and the passing lane studies statewide. It's one of the ones we really want to start working on passing lanes as possible, particularly along the 95 and 93 routes. Next slide. On the highway fund revenue here, as shown on this chart, Nevada utilizes highway user fees, highway funds that are shared with DMV, DPS, and Transportation Authority, primarily Highway Patrol. And it's pretty self-explanatory, but if they want any more questions, there'll be more. In addition to the highway fund, NDOT also receives federal aid. The federal aid program is a reimbursement program requiring an upfront expenditure of highway funds. Due to the high percentage of federal land in our state, most FHWA programs require only a 5% match. Many also will require an 80-20 for some of it, but typically for other states it is an 80-20. So our state dollars do go farther with the federal funds. However, grants often have other match requirements. So on a regular project, we would often have a 595. But for example, the Tropicana was a 60-40, which means we could do 60% of federal funds because there was grants in there, but we have to match with 40% of state funds. So the grants are a wonderful thing, but it's also a little bit of a double-edged sword. I-80 East, Ely, and the phase things also have varying degrees of matching funds. Federal aid revenue figures reflect an increased amount of reimbursement because we did have in the last few years the bipartisan infrastructure law, also known as bill, that increased federal aid to Nevada by approximately 20% in federal fiscal year 2022 and 2% each federal fiscal year thereafter through fiscal year 26. This increase in federal aid requires increase in state match and state-funded preliminary work. The increased federal funding, while it was a blessing, was also did not keep pace with inflation. So it did help mitigate the impacts of construction material inflation. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And with the next appropriation bill, and we are waiting to hear if a continuing resolution will be passed. If it's a continuing resolution is passed, it will maintain the current figures until a new appropriation bill will be passed. The construction costs, we mentioned this on here. In the last, basically since 2020, the last quarter of 2020, the cost of roadway construction has literally gone up 68%. So that's the material, primarily concrete, asphalt, steel, and also labor. So that's pretty self-explanatory. That's, as you can see, looking at this grant, this chart is the National Construction Cost Index. And so we were tracking very similarly here in the state. So we did track what our costs were here, and it showed about 65%, and so very close to the other, and very, talking with our neighboring states, very common with all of there. The increase in construction costs, to reiterate the prior slide, in 2020, the cost of roadway construction is by about highway construction costs overall approximately 60% since December 2020. This is largely due to inflation, higher material costs, and also the increased demand. With supply chain management, it becomes a little bit more of a competition to actually even get the material. Annual growth rate, the Federal Highway Administration reported that highway construction costs continue to grow at an annual rate of about 24%. And again, the factors of that, as I already mentioned, were higher prices for asphalt and oil, increased demand for construction materials, and a tight labor market. And it's also a thing to note is that while many of these things have leveled off, they have not gone down. So the increased costs are pretty much here to stay, or at least that is how we're looking at it right now. This slide shows you how NDOT uses the highway funds. 74% of the funds go towards construction and construction engineering cost, and 7% go to administrative cost. All other includes the other categories like in-state travel, honor camp, and just other really smaller programs. And our next few slides will review the current and future transportation needs. So this one shows the summary of the 10-year transportation needs by category, showing the methodology outlined above. Estimates are in 2024 dollars. Inflation was applied to costs that were not already inflation adjusted as outlined in earlier methodology. Due to the high construction costs in recent years, an average 5-year inflation percentage change was computed using NDOT's NHCCI for the period spanning from 2018 to 2023, revealing a rate of approximately 10%. Recognizing this high inflation as likely an anomaly expected to diminish over time, a step decrease of 2% per annum was applied over the subsequent 4 years. This means values for 2025 were adjusted for 10% inflation, followed by adjustment for 8% in 26, 6% in 27, and 4% in 28. We will obviously monitor this closely, but and subsequent years' values were then adjusted for the 2.5% inflation, reflecting the average rate over the past 20 years, if the past 5 years were excluded from the calculation. This table applies, this one applies NDOT revenue projection to display the unfunded backlog between needs and anticipated funding. We have a 1-year unfunded backlog. You know, depending on the project, it's between basically $500 million to $873 million. There are many, many more projects that are being deferred, and so that backlog is growing. But just before we go in here, I guess one of the comment is as we're projecting and we're looking at the projects moving forward, we are looking very closely at basically looking at worst case scenario. We're looking at if some grant funding or some federal funding does not fully come through, what do we need to take to use state funds to make sure that the projects are whole? We do have some bonding funds we use. We look at that very closely at how, because we don't want to get over bonded where there will be paying just back in bonds. So we have that balance of advancing the projects to take advantage of the lower bond rates as opposed to the inflation rate of construction versus the future part, and not selling off the future on there. And also we're looking to make good on the projects that are already out there in the queue and making sure they get delivered. So as we go into the budget request summary, and next year I'm going to ask that this print is a lot bigger because I'm having trouble reading my slide. As we look through the different budget requests, you can see the decision unit on the left, and then we'll go through them pretty much in order, slightly out. New positions. From our personnel, we did ask for 29 new classified positions, 1 new unclassified position, and then in the E25, 8 there. When we talk about these, I want you to know that we did go back. We have another unit going in. We did reduce the amount of positions requested. With the change of administration, we're looking very closely at what programs are affected. And with some of those, we're not going to, there was some removed, like some from the environmental part, until what's clear what programs are actually going to stay for the next 4 years, what are the focus areas. Most of the ones that we are asking for, there was a rural communication specialist, and that's one where we want to have someone go around this, really work with the counties outside of Clark and Washoe. The urban areas get a lot of attention. There's just a lot more going on. The projects are generally bigger there, but the other counties are not getting the attention that they need. And it's really someone to talk to, not the staff where we talk and we do the regular kind of work part, but actually seeing what kind of growth they're looking at, what they're looking at, their visioning for their area, but what are their pain points coming in. Like talking with Winnemucca about with the Thatcher mine, the lithium mine coming in. We know it's coming in, we know it's being built. We know that there was 2 passing lanes determined for that area. It would be nice if they were actually done not at the time when the mine opens, as it's starting to build it, but be done when the mine was open. We do not build ahead of time for things that might come, but there is a point when things are very sure, well established, and we're trying to be good partners and work with them on that. But it's really taking the time, and a lot of these are meetings that I've done on weekends because we can't get it, can't make the meetings during the week. We also have we're asking for a couple of positions that will replace contracts that we have in IT. There's 2 in there. We've had more luck in the last couple of years of actually filling the positions. And when we hire them in, they are more cost effective than consulting them out. And we've also asked for some positions that actually take care of, in the rural areas, take care of facilities. Our facilities across the state are very much, they're 50, 60 plus years old. They're ailing. They need furnaces, they need roofs, they need expanded septic fields, and those type of repairs. And on the reclassification, we have 3, the graphics tech to a public information officer. That's one where the existing, it's just outdated. As we're moving into more of a digital era, we're not doing as much kind of paper. We're doing a lot more digital, and we just need a different skill set. The pilot 2 to the management analyst 2, that one is having someone taking care of the administrative part of our aviation program, while the pilots, then we spend more just actually flying and less time doing the maintenance, scheduling of the people moving, and then an admin assistant to a management analyst 1. Again, most of these are because the skill set that's needed has changed for those. The fueling system upgrade. Currently, there are 92 state and local government agencies utilizing NDOT's fueling system, of which 58 are state agencies. While NDOT is the primary user of our fueling system, there are many, as an agency, we have over 5,000 people that actually use the system. So that would be first responders, DPS, Department of Public Safety. In an emergency, many of these areas around the state become the emergency site, the kind of the center, because they can get the fuel. So it's critically important that we keep these up and running around the state. This is something that I started working on before I retired, and so it's been going on, I want to say, for almost a decade. It seems like forever, but as they progress, as we went into them, we also had a look at leaking tanks. We looked at ground contamination, so some of that grew into a larger project than anticipated. We also wanted to do it in sequential years so that they don't all fail at once. They generally have kind of a lifespan of 25, 30 years, but if they're all done at the same time, then they all start to fail at the same time. Out of the 53 fuel locations that will be upgraded, we have completed 31 of them. The next site to be updated will be Incline Village, followed by Battle Mountain, Austin, Big Smoky, and Carson City. New equipment. Prior to the recession, NDOT spent $10 million a year on equipment, and then for 6 years, NDOT had no budget at all for equipment. And then after that, when we came back, we had $6 million per year. Even at the original, when we had $10 million a year, we were basically losing a piece of the fleet each year. It was not enough to completely maintain it. We can't keep up completely with the rate of deterioration. The last time when I was here before you 2 years ago, I let you know that we were number 49 in the nation for the condition of our equipment. We're trying to move the needle, and you approved last time the $20 billion that was requested at that time, and we appreciate that very much. When we order equipment, particularly the large pieces, it's not like you order it and it's delivered in 3 or 4 months. We order it, and many times it is 12 to 24 months before it's actually delivered, particularly the large ones like the snowplows, the stripers, the sweepers. Many of these large pieces of equipment are critical for not only just handling our everyday clearing snow, again, striping for safety, sweeping for air quality, particularly in the non-attainment areas of Washoe and Clark. Then on the maintenance stations and rest areas, we are spending more just on upkeep. We are, again, just kind of the condition of the infrastructure, and at this point I'm talking about the building infrastructure around the state. For instance, at headquarters, we are flushing out, we're looking at all the plumbing system on there. We had to replace a huge intake valve on top of the roof that had part of our air circulation. Minor housing we have put on hold. The Searchlight maintenance station we have put on hold. And some of the ones where we were looking at actually building. So Bowowie should be moving forward. That's a rest area we'll be looking at in 2027. Moving forward, the one in the Trinity area is actually on hold, but that's because of we're looking at an electric line extension. We don't have the permitting to move forward on that. And then the Miller rest area is on hold, it is on hold for construction deferred until we have the funding for it. We can talk more about that if we need to. Replacement of the Nevada Shared Radio System. The Nevada Shared Radio System, also known as NSRS, reached the end of its support by the manufacturer in December of 2017. The Department of Transportation, as a lead agency on behalf of the state of Nevada, is working to replace the existing Land Mobile Radio LMR system in partnership with the two other infrastructure owners, Washoe County and NV Energy. The radio system is vital to the ongoing operations and emergency response and provides coverage where and when cellular coverage is unavailable. The NSRS has nearly 16,000 users defined as portables, mobiles, consoles, and fixed data locations, and is utilized by state, federal, and local government agencies for emergency services and in support of their daily operations. Due to the size and complexity of this radio system, the transition is taking place over an extended period of time to minimize users' interruption and costs. Also, when we're actually going into construction, access to many of the radio sites is limited to just a few months a year. And some of the higher elevation, it must be during the summer. Some of the early ones came on when we have really like heavy winter weather. We can't get in there at all. Some of these stations have frozen over, so we've had to go in at different times and change the scheduling on that. And the pandemic also caused a significant delay to the project, and which we're just kind of working to overcome. Inflation, supply chain, and prevailing wage challenges also have impacted the project schedule. And the cost as it goes through is not, it has definitely increased over the years. Again, the cost of the supplies, the cost of the components used in this have simply gone up. Bond construction. The department will periodically sell bonds to help fund projects. The sale of bonds will allow us to advance major projects while hedging against inflation. We mentioned this earlier. NDOT sold bonds in 6 years of the past 10 years for totaling $965 million. And that also included bonds with fuel revenue indexing bonds in the fiscal year 21, 24, and 25. We work with the Treasurer's Office financial consultants and the Bond Council prior to any bond sales to ensure the financial feasibility. We are forecasting in fiscal year 26 and 27 bond sales would occur close to the end of each respective state fiscal year. So if approved, this timing currently aligns with NDOT's financial planning and project timelines. We are the Department of Transportation's bond rating, our S&P, AAA, motor vehicle fuel tax, AA plus for the fuel revenue indexing, and the Fitch is an AA plus and the Moody is an AA1. So we have very good bond ratings. I talk about the wildlife crossings now. I'm moving into decision unit, the 4659. AB 112 provided a one-time $5 million general fund appropriation for wildlife crossing projects. And we were awarded a grant last year for wildlife crossings. We had mentioned this in another presentation. There were several. However, at this point, we are still unsure about the actual award of the grant. The grant is not obligated at this time, so we do not have confirmation it's coming through. We are still hopeful, but we're watching it closely. So the reduce, basically over the lifetime, I mean, wildlife crossings are significant around the state, and reducing the impact or any of the species out there that we mitigate for, and not having them go over the vehicles. I don't know why I'm stumbling over that one, but vehicle animal impact. So we reduce the wildlife mortality by providing safe passages across the road and highways. Wildlife that can significantly reduce the risk of the animals being hit by vehicles. And then the preservation of genetic diversity, the wildlife crossings allow animals to move freely between the habitats and preventing genetic isolation. And when animals can access different animals, it promotes ecological balance. For instance, predators can control prey populations and pollinators can disperse seeds, benefiting plant diversity. On human safety, wildlife crossings prevent collisions, as we said, between vehicles and large animals, such as deer, elk, or bear, and reducing the risk of accidents and injuries to both the drivers and passengers. And over time, the wildlife crossings do save money by minimizing the damage to vehicles and reducing insurance claim and avoiding road repairs caused by collisions. We do use this funding that you had to match some federal funding. And since 2010, NDOT has invested more than $43 million on efforts to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions and improve wildlife connectivity across the state highway system. These include overpasses and underpasses and culvert and bridge expansions. It's one of those things, a tortoise crossing, and I have to admit, when I asked what a tortoise crossing was, it actually is a modified pipe. There are little smooth kind of areas where the turtles can actually kind of get in and go across the pipe. It's actually pretty cute, but. And that concludes my presentation, and open for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Director Larkin. I had to ask that question as well, so. So now we all know. Now we all know. We do have several questions, and we'll pretty much go in order, and we'll just start, and then yourself and your staff as necessary. Please feel free to go ahead and answer. So we will start. Our first question is from Senator Wynn.
I know you covered a lot. Thank you, Chair. So I'm just going to kind of bring you back to where I want to start with my questions, I guess, and maybe give some context. I'm not talking about the 3 work programs that were just recently submitted for our consideration at IFC in April, but I am kind of directing your attention to there was a non-IFC approval work program that was approved for $22.6 million in equipment purchases in fiscal year 2025. Are you familiar with where I am in this before I continue to ask questions?
It was a balance forward, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Tracy Larkin, for the
yes, it was a
record.
balance forward from that was expended. But in looking at the ending, I guess, including the non-IFC work program in your projections would result in an ending highway fund balance of $28.9 million, which is $122.6 million below the targeted 1.5 capital expenditure ending balance calculated for fiscal year 25. Are we still on the same page here?
Yes.
I guess obviously there's now that lower balance because that 22.6 is not included in there. So what impact would the projected highway fund balance being much lower than calculated minimum for fiscal year 25 and fiscal year 26 have on your cash flow needs, as well as the corresponding state's bond rating?
Tracy Larkin for the record. Felicia Denny may also jump in here on answering this question. It is of deep concern to us. We're looking at, as we were mentioning before, we are looking at the project statewide. We are looking what grants we have. We are looking at the promises made. In each case, I'm planning, we're working on a worst case scenario. Like, if this happens, what do we need to carry it through? If the federal funding doesn't come through on this project, can we use some bond to cover it, to keep it going? And then majority of it we have deferred. We have cut our state program down considerably. The preservation is almost non-existent. This year we're pretty much working on signs, striping, and culvert cleaning and patching on there. So when we look at the state funds on there, we first look at, obviously there's payroll, so we pay our people. Then there is emergency management, but as it gets tighter, and we match the federal funds. We try to match every dollar because obviously the federal funds coming in and we have a favorable match. It becomes our ability to meet some of these other needs is becoming diminished. Now, this year has been a mild winter, but you may recall 2 years ago when you were some in there, it was a very wet winter. It was heavy snow and then flooding. And the first 3 months that I was here, we had 40 emergency contracts. They varied in different amounts. Some of them were just a couple 100,000. A few went up to like 7 million. These were things that needed to be addressed now. It's not a more of a decision of we can defer it. It means it's the safety of actually driving on that roadway, or it was undercutting underneath the roadways, of shoring up the sides. So those are concerns. Am I going too long?
I'm just going to kind of stop you. I mean, I recognize that. So obviously there are huge implications potentially for our state bond rating if we're not able to like close that gap. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And just kind of on that same thing, what are some more, I guess, specific ramifications of having an unrestricted highway fund balance that's below the recommended 1 month operating and the 1.5 months capital construction expenditures? Gosh, I mean, in this fiscal year 25 and 26 and 27.
Felicia Denny for the record. This highway fund balance is projected to increase over the upcoming biennium as NDOT continues to defer projects and focuses primarily on federal funding, as Director Larkin mentioned. However, it is very concerning to us, and so for instance, you mentioned our equipment budget work program was a balance forward of equipment already ordered. We've held off on ordering additional equipment that we've budgeted this year. The implications are that we'll have more unmet needs. We may not be as ready for emergencies as we'd like to have that cushion for emergencies. The State Highway Fund is also used by the DMV, DPS, Transportation Authority, so having a lower balance impacts those agencies as well. And so we're proceeding with caution. I will add that that's the unrestricted balance. There are additional restricted funds and bond funds. And so we're working hard to utilize the highway fund to the best of our ability to get the most out of those dollars that we can. I hope that answers your question.
I mean, it does. I mean, obviously, it sounds like there are significant ramifications for the implementation of these projects, our ability to respond if we have weather emergencies or any other kind of emergencies. And obviously, I just have some concerns, and I just ask you to continue to work with our fiscal staff, especially as I know you have some pretty significant projects that are coming before IFC also in April, to make sure we can figure out how, those calculations of the highway fund balance will be updated with some of these things. So I just ask you to continue to work with our staff to make sure that we are addressing these things timely.
Felicia Denny for the record. Yes, we do work with your staff and we appreciate their help as we can go back and forth and make sure we're not missing anything. I also would like to add that some of the discretionary grant opportunities require higher than our typical match. And so we don't want to miss out on those opportunities, and that's another risk that we run, is not applying for potential grant money if we don't have enough money to make a higher match. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Assemblymember Anderson?
Thank you, Chair. This is possibly just going to continue on with the last question as well. You mentioned in slide 6 about the possibility of having to defer, in particular for the North Valleys, which as somebody that gets to drive that almost on a daily basis, since my school is out in that area, that concerns me. What other possible programs are being deferred due to this lack of available funding from the Highway Fund and increases in inflation? And then I might possibly have a follow-up.
Tracy Larkin for the record. A lot of our preservation program has been deferred because it is completely state-funded. Our betterments in the field at the different district levels. As I said, we're turning some of our attention to some other programs like signs and things that do also need to be done, but do not take as much of the funds away. Basically looking at, we've moved other projects out into further years. As we look at any major project around the state, it's just, we have placeholders and looking at the projects just get moved further out if we cannot meet the ones in the current year. So right now we're looking at a couple 2 and 3 year projections, which we always have, but we really solidified what we can put out in 25. Calendar year, so it's actually looking at fiscal year 26 now. And then we'll be looking at 27, and we're firming those up. But those, really beyond that, we are looking at what we need to move out to accommodate what we can pay for now and manage the cash flow. And that's what
Follow-up,
really-
please? Nope, sorry,
Sorry.
as you were saying.
Oh, I was just going to say, with regard to the North Valleys Phase 2, we are still planning on advertising later this year and moving on there. We have told the contracting community, though, that it would not begin construction until the following year because we cannot guarantee at this point. So it's more of a hedging our bet.
Sorry about that. I didn't know if you knew where I was there for quite some time. So I heard about the preservation and then some other projects, but what are those other projects? It sounds like you're pushing some of them just back. Do you have specific projects so that way we know which ones those are? Or is it just going to be a general answer of, we're just going to push them back a little bit and then we'll let you know later?
Well, in each area, it's balancing on the cash flow of when it would go out, what else is going on in the area. So in Southern Nevada, we have Neon Phase 2, we have Via Nobila, and the Henderson. Now, we plan on, we want to move something on the Henderson because that was something that was promised and not delivered at this point, and it still needs to have phase going in. But as we put dollars into that, that does mean other ones may be deferred outward.
Thank you, Chair. I do have numerous other questions, but those I'll take offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Assemblymember Mosca?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much. I believe that you said you called it a double-edged sword, which I understand, but can you talk about what does NDOT think of regarding the availability of federal funds, and how we're going to deal with that of this current fiscal year and the upcoming biennium?
Thank you. Sandra Rosenberg, Deputy Director of Planning and Administration, SONDRA, ROSENBERG. We are watching the federal situation very, very closely. We're very involved with ASHTO, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. I have the pleasure of serving as Vice Chair on the policy forum for that group. So we're getting, weekly, if not daily, updates on that. So we're very concerned about the federal funding. Any grants that have been awarded but not obligated yet, and we received several of them towards the end of last year, are under review, is what they're saying. So we don't have guidance yet on whether or not those are secured, including that North Valley's grant that was mentioned. So we're working with the governor's lobbying team. We're working with a team that we have in DC that helps support us. We're working with AASHTO to try and get some clarity. Of course, convey the importance of these projects and that continued federal funding, and just watching very carefully. We are hopeful that the formula funding will continue at the authorized levels, maybe slightly below. We heard some good news yesterday that a full-year continuing resolution is likely, and they're trying to fit in that 2% increase that was authorized. That's not typical in a continuing resolution. And we're hopeful that the last year of the IIJA will be appropriated. We kind of have to wait and see. As it relates to grants, again, we have those grants that were awarded but not obligated yet. In addition, we have a couple grant applications that have gone in, but haven't been reviewed or approved yet. So we're anxiously waiting. And again, conveying to our delegation and anyone we have that has a voice in DC that it's really important to keep these programs going, including a bridge investment grant that we've applied for $136 million. We are being very, if grants continue, we're going to be very, very selective, including looking at that match requirement. As we mentioned, that puts a strain on our highway fund dollars. We do have a couple grants that are pending or under review that have zero match. So we're certainly going to keep our eyes on those opportunities in the future if they continue. We're also continuing working with the delegation and DC staff on community projects or earmarks that, again, those are secure if they were in a prior appropriations bill, but those that have been proposed, again, we're trying to gather that information. So really, we're being cautiously optimistic, and we're looking at various scenarios of funding depending on what happens at the federal level. We are looking at, I know you asked about projects. We are looking to see those projects, the betterments and preservation projects that were typically state funded. We're looking at what elements of that could be federalized, again, to maximize that 95/5 option we have with the federal government. So again, cautiously optimistic, continuing to watch what happens, but preparing in case there is a delay or potentially lower funding, and just adjusting our program for that. Even if the funding does continue at the prior levels, we have already slowed down our program. So there's already an impact, and we're continuing to convey that message to Washington.
Follow-up, Chair. Thank you, and thank you for that, and for us to know how much you're monitoring. We do very much appreciate that. And my question is then, when it comes to our ability to pay our employees as well as our contractors, what steps have you all taken to be on the front end if that has to happen? And what are we anticipating, if anything?
I'll start, and Director Larkin can fill in. Again, Sandra Rosenberg for the record. We are paying our employees is a top priority, so we are factoring that in as a must do. That is absolutely essential. What we've done is, as Director Larkin and Assistant Director Denny have mentioned, slowed down what is going out the door. So that's why we see a projected dip and then it coming back up, because we're slowing down future obligations, future contracts. And you may hear that from the contracting community. They are seeing it already. But paying, projects that are already out the door, paying our employees, keeping the lights on, paying the bills, that's our top priority, and we're adjusting those other things that can be postponed. You want to add to that? Or?
Thank you. And my last question is just, what factors did the department consider in determining the projects to fund and complete in the 25-27 biennium, with the recommendation included in the governor's recommended budget?
Again, I will start. Sandra Rosenberg for the record. We look at a number of factors, again, prior commitments, projects that have already started. We have a performance-based prioritization process called the One Nevada Plan that looks at a number of our performance measures to help prioritize the programs and projects. It's a two-phase approach. There's a prioritization based on the data. There's also what we call harmonization, looking at things like geographic distribution, governor's priorities, budget limitations, maximizing federal funding availability. So we can provide that backup if you'd like, but really we look at, again, paying our employees, really looking at the safety of the system and preserving our assets as a top priority, while at the same time maximizing the available federal funds to maximize the use of those state highway funds.
Senator Tice? Can I ask an additional question, please? Right here, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm worried about these projects that you have on your list and hearing the funding limitations and the concerns of federal funding and what we have actually in the bank, and we're looking at maybe increasing bonding. Do we have enough money right now to pay for the projects that we have already started?
The projects that are already under construction, we have made a priority. Again, it's one of our focus areas, but yes, we have determined our Plan A and Plan B with the ones out that are already under construction. For instance, North Phase 2. Phase 1, the North Valley Phase 1. If there's a limitation, there is some bond money to cover that, existing bond money that can be utilized for that. But we don't take on additional, we're not going to take on additional responsibilities for payment until we're sure that those are cleared.
So just for clarification, if I might, Madam Chair, like that North Valley's, which my son lives that direction. I drive through there, and it's like, oh my gosh, if we're going to leave that partially finished, I mean, you have enough bank and capacity to finish those projects that you have started.
We are going to finish Phase 1, and there is a preservation project there that is going on. We do have the cash flow for that. Where what we're looking at is Phase 2B. And that's the one where I said before, we were hedging our bets, in which case that has the $89 million grant in it. And until we're sure of that grant going through, that will throw a wrench in the funding for that.
So what I'm hearing is that you don't have the funding currently to finish the complete project Phase 1, Phase 2.
I have the money to finish the ones that are under construction. I am watching closely for the ones that are not yet begun, that have not yet advertised. So yes, it is part of the phase.
So you haven't gone out to bid for the other phases, those kind of things, correct?
Correct.
And that will be completed with monies in the bank.
The phase that is out is,
I'm not getting a clear answer from you.
I'm not trying to be obtuse on this. I'm just saying the existing one, if you're talking about the entire, all three phases, no. We have the money that guaranteed in the bank for the phases that are currently advertised and under construction. The last phase, which has not yet advertised, that has the grant money in it, until we are sure about the grant money, I am not sure about that project.
So if we were to follow up on that, if we were to receive that grant money, we have the capacity then to move forward that project with monies that we have?
That is the intent. Oh, that's what we're looking at the cash flow on.
But you'd have to, so we don't have the money, we're going to have to figure out the cash flow if we do get that grant. I want just some clarity.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Nguyen?
Sorry, I'm struggling to understand your answers to these questions. I feel like we have to be very specific. So we do not have the money to complete the entire project. Following up with what Senator Titus said.
And I apologize, Tracy Larkin for the record, I apologize if it's not clear. For me, a project, that's 3 projects. It's not a single project.
Okay.
So I apologize for that. The ones under construction, we are making a priority to finish. We are watching the cash flow and the anticipated cash flow, which will be dependent on what the grants coming in with the continuing resolution, the federal funds that will be coming in, that will secure it. Now the phase.
So I'm just going to interrupt you
Okay,
just briefly
please.
here. So when we talk about Phase 1, let's just pick one of these projects that has started construction. You have the funding to complete Phase 1. What does that mean for our constituents that are out on the roads, like, what does phase one mean? Are they going to see any benefit to having a phase one completed? Or like, what does that mean?
There's considerable benefit to having
Okay.
the phase one completed.
So it's not a project where you have 3 phases, and if you complete phase one, it really doesn't mean anything. So they will see a significant benefit if we were to like lose any of those matching grant
It's-
funding and we had to stop at phase one.
Ma'am, it is very common for us to have phases. Each phase is a project that can stand alone. The Spaghetti Bowl has 5 phases, and we finished phase one. Phase two, which was by the Nugget, is still under design, still in the NEPA part. And in Vegas, we had Neon, which was phase one. We have a Neon phase two, which is now several years later. So the phasing is just mean when we complete, as we look at the overall corridor or the overall interchanges and so on for that area, they are broken down into projects that are complete unto themselves, that bring benefit. There's no benefit of doing something that has no benefit to the public, but it's then that makes sure that initial phases will be prepared to feed into the subsequent phases.
That's kind of that answers my question completely. I just wanted to make
Apologize.
sure that people understood that when they hear phase one, I think the general public doesn't understand that, living in that area where the Spaghetti Bowl is, obviously I am very well aware that it seems like an ongoing project because when you finish phase one and you start phase two, it just seems like a never-ending construction project, which at the end of phase five, obviously all of those things will be integrated in time to start a new project in the area, I'm sure. But that's mostly what I wanted to do. When we were talking about projects that look like they're towards the completion, can I bring you back to that Tropicana project? What phase are we at in that Tropicana
We
project?
are in the last few months of that.
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Senator. I'm so glad you got a response that you wanted to hear. Right, we were not going to go on. I do want to jump in here a little bit, and thank you, Director Larkin. I want to turn our attention a little bit to the highway funds. Right, we recognize, you showed us trends, we recognize that those revenues are actually trending downward, right? But if you look at the governor's recommended budget, he's recommending that we bond, right, against those dollars. And I'm wondering if you think that is a sustainable long-term strategy, if you will, because there's minimal growth, as you know and as you demonstrated in that fund.
Felicia Denny for the record. We can't bond forever. It's not sustainable, of course. What the department does is we work with the treasurer's bond council and look at whether bonding is feasible. And during the 2026-2027 budgets, we're thinking it is a feasible alternative to allow us to continue with projects. As we get closer to that time, there have been instances in the past where we've maybe had a bond in our budget and decided either it's not feasible or a project's not ready, or we've reduced the amount of bonding. So we do have those options as well as we get closer to the time period. But we do reach a point where we can't bond every single year. It gets to a point where the pay-as-you-go versus bonding mix gets to be where it doesn't make sense. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm going to give myself permission to follow up. What other solutions have you been able to research and identify? Because we know that those revenues in the highway fund are decreasing, but of course the needs for those are not.
Sandra Rosenberg, for the record. In the 2021 session, NDOT was tasked with convening an advisory working group to look at sustainable transportation funding. That report is available online. It has been provided to the governor and the legislature with a number of different potential options for sustainable funding. NDOT's role is to advise and educate. We cannot say here's the solution, but there is a suite of solutions on there. We, again, continue to look at what other states are doing. But the reality is the primary fund source, the fuel tax has not increased since 1993. So we are trying to run a 2025 transportation program on essentially 1993 dollars. There's a number of, there's information available out there from both that study, which again, we facilitated. We had one person at the table of 29 members, so it's not necessarily an NDOT recommendation, but that report is available online, nvtransportationfuture.org, and it has been provided to, I know, some of the committees.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in right here.
Yeah.
Has that report been made available to this committee?
We would be happy to provide it. I don't recall which committees it was sent to at
Okay,
the time.
I know that we have a lot of them, I
Yes,
know.
yes,
I know.
happy to provide that. Yeah, so we are concerned about the funding levels, and we continue to look and provide, again, education on various different options from other states and national studies.
Okay, well, I certainly appreciate that. So if you wouldn't mind getting that to the committee secretary, then we can share those as well. And then we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to ask you to just be concise, if you will, in the answers, so that we can get through them, because eventually we all need to go to lunch. So I think that will be helpful, because we just have a lot of questions, if that's okay. Chair Watts?
Thank you, Chair Taylor. So I just wanted to follow up on that piece. I've spoken with you. I've seen some of the work that's come out of some of those working groups. You did note, though, you said, your role is to compile information and educate. But, we know a lot of agencies do bring forward various policy proposals, especially linked to addressing some of the budgetary concerns. So I was wondering, outside of just providing those findings to the governor, was there any conversation or proposal to the governor's office to bring forward some of these solutions to address the issues we're talking about?
I think all I can say is we continue to work with the governor and provide information on various different options. I'm not at liberty to say what specifically, his policy stance. And so, again, we continue to work with him and his staff and provide information on what other states are doing.
Thank you. Yes, well, we know what is before us this session and what is missing. So I'll just take it from there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Assembly Member Dickman? Oh, you wanted to jump in and follow up on that, Senator Titus? I see that. We'll go to Senator Titus and then Assembly
This
Member
is just a quick one, and you may not have the answers, but when you look at that funding policy that you're going to submit and all those options, have you included, and this is going to be kind of like a little bomb here, have you included the options of a toll roads, and that would fit in on those plans that you're doing?
Sandra Rosenberg, for the record, I'd have to go back to look at that study. I know that was an option that was evaluated. So if you look at the full report, that was an option that was evaluated. I believe it was eliminated from recommendation based on the vote of the advisory committee or advisory working group.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Assembly Member Dickman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And would you mind if I do a couple questions? Thank you. And thanks for being here. It's good to see you. Can we switch gears a little bit and talk about the 39 new positions? I know that's changed, but could you explain how the department prioritized its recommendations for the 39 and how that recommendation has changed in recent weeks?
Certainly. Tracy Larkin for the record. A lot of when the reevaluation came in, it was when the administration changed, and we started looking at the elimination of several, for like the NEVI program is permanently on pause at this point. Maybe I shouldn't say permanently, but it's on pause. And then there are also other environmental programs that are on pause. A good portion of what we had requested was a reorganization of the environmental area. What we did is we prioritized areas where we have contracts out where we believe we can now fill them with a position, and that's more cost effective to have them inside. We also have a number of we asked for a couple of audit positions, and that was more for internal controls to continue to upgrade those that the audit hadn't been, we haven't had an increase in that area for a couple of decades, I think. And then also we have facility, particularly in the rural areas, because we have trouble getting different types of contractors specific like I said, when I'm talking like Austin and the really rural areas, it's more of a handyman who continues to keep the facilities intact, to keep them going. That's really what that came down to, was looking at the bare bones of what we thought would be more cost effective to have the position.
Okay, thank you. And you brought up the audit positions, the equipment auditor and administration auditor. So there was recently an audit by the Legislative Audit Department. Can you tell us how those positions would assist the department in addressing those audit findings?
Absolutely. When, actually even before the audit findings, we had requested and were moving forward, we were moving the equipment to a centralization. They were different depending on where you are in the states. The equipment shops are either under the districts or under headquarters. They're now all under headquarters to ensure that the documentation in each area is consistent. There are regular meetings going on to, again, ensure that the processes are in place, and the auditor, there's an additional auditor in there to go over the documentation, making sure that, you know, what's ordered matches what's put on a car, what's how it's actually put into the system, how it's registered back into the system. There was a superintendent, again, that position has already been filled, put down in the Las Vegas area. Typically, historically, I should say, and I mean, I'm talking decades, it has fallen under a maintenance supervisor. By moving it under an equipment one, it's someone more familiar with the actual work itself, the work product, and that is in motion, and it's the movement of the equipment shops has already been completed.
Okay. One more question?
And
Thank you, Chair. Could you just briefly provide an update on what steps are being taken to address some of the other findings in the
certainly,
audit?
on the stockpile ones, we have looked at, that was something that was actually a result of an earlier audit in 2020, and our maintenance area had been working on looking at alternative ways to actually measure stockpiles. One of these, it's kind of an imprecise type of area, but in a lot of it around the state where people were using sticks, they were going by the shoulder heights, it was an estimate. So there's now a computer app. They took a few years to find the computer app, which is rolling out. It's just started rolling out, where they walk around and it actually kind of calculates. So we're looking at ways to actually put it in there and calculate and put it in.
I'm
We
sorry,
did-
Director Larkin, I'm sorry, I'm jumping in just for
I'm
a
sorry,
minute.
I'm speaking too long?
Yeah, because that was a previous audit, right? You just
No,
said
no,
that was a
no.
previous audit, is that
No, I'm
results
saying
or-
that it initiated in the previous audit, but on this one, it was in there, we
There's that.
do have the app.
Fantastic. Okay,
And the
thank
app
you.
is rolling out to address what was in on
Understandable.
this one.
Thank you, that's my mistake. Please continue, but stay concise. Please, thank you.
I'm
We just have a
trying.
lot
I'm
of
usually
questions.
not known for being
That's okay.
verbose, but-
No, I know you're passionate about what you do, and that's not a bad thing. But we just
So,
have many questions, so no problem. Thank you.
And then other in controls, like using the utilization of cars and so on. We're also doing internal audits where they can go in and actually do mini audits of like light vehicles and so on, and adding some other information to the documents that you sign when you do home storage and on there. So we have taken a number of controls already in place.
Good, thank you. Good to hear. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome, Assembly Member. Assembly Member Hibbets?
Hang on, I need my glasses. Director, I'm going to take you to E226. Can you explain the work of the new environmental scientist positions and how the reduction in recommended staff would affect NDOT's environmental services program?
Nova Simpson for the record, N-O-V-A-S-I-M-P-S-O-N. So I am not the environmental chief, but I'll try to do my best to address that. I've worked for NDOT for about 12 years, so we deal with the regulatory side of everything that we do, maintenance, up to full-blown new roadways and construction. We have to do a lot of consulting out because we don't have the capacity to take on some of the topics that we have to address, such as some of the NEPA considerations, EIS, environmental impact statements, EA's environmental assessments, BA's biological assessments, cultural resources, air noise, as well as hazmat. Area night and asbestos as well, if I missed that. So we have a lot of things that we have to look at. It's hard to say what is going to happen with the current policies and how that's going to be affected. But just for example, I work in the biology section. U.S. Fish and Wildlife requires quite a bit of mitigation, monitoring during construction projects, et cetera. And so I know that's been a big topic of concern with the costs that we put forward and to consultants. And so trying to have something that can help with the monitoring and kind of that regulatory compliance side. We'll have to continue to sub out to contractors. And so that's going to be a big cost. It's a lot of money. I don't have that because, again, not the chief, but that could be something we could provide you what we're spending every year. My understanding is it's several $1 million on consultants for that part of the program. So that's just one very small part.
Well, thank you. I was going to ask about E819, your rural communities, but I think you pretty well covered that in your presentation, so I appreciate that. But I do have a question. With all the positions in NDOT, you have approximately 69 of those positions been vacant longer than a year. Have you done any analysis to see if you could move those vacant positions or repurpose them to perform the functions of the new positions that you're requesting?
Tracy Larkin for the record. Yes, we do look at those positions. There are some areas, particularly like maintenance workers in the rural areas. We still need those positions if we can get to fill them. So some of them have been open. Engineering positions, again, particularly in the rural areas, Tonopah has been down for several years. Assistant district engineer who's engineering, so usually leadership. Right now, it's vacant. It's not been a year, but it's been vacant in Ely. We also just had another engineer retire in Elko on the district engineer. We are having trouble with engineering in filling in structural area and also hydrology. We're down about 25%, and it looks like it'll probably be at 50 or 60% reduction in those areas. Engineering also in construction. Those are positions that we need if we can fill them, which is why we are looking at retaining them, with the hope that with some of the changes in the pay we have been able to fill. We have gone from almost 26% vacancy rate to we're now to 14.7. So definitely a step in the right direction. But we still need those positions. And that's why we have not repurposed some of them. Other ones we are looking at moving over to other areas or taking on other duties if necessary.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Chair Watts?
Thank you, Chair. I have a few. So just following up on my colleague's question. So again, we know that 69 positions have been open for a year. So it's been extremely challenging to fill those positions. So I understand that the need is there, but just to get clarity, did you consider either eliminating or reallocating those positions to help support some of these other needs?
A few of them, yes, but again, on some of them, we did not, particularly like maintenance and the engineering ones. We really need or want to have leadership in some of the more rural areas, because now we're spending a lot of time one of my deputy directors over operations is spending a lot more time in District 3 traveling, which I mean is fine, but it takes a lot of just checking in and monitoring on each area because we don't have the leadership positions there.
Okay, so you did consider a few, but then ultimately decided to keep these and then propose these new positions. So I have another question. I see that we have a proposed new unclassified rural community specialist. I think you just mentioned some of the travel needs, but again, given the difficult financial situation, particularly that this department finds itself in, why did you determine the need to add this position to really, it seems like do the work of some of the other positions within the department, but just with a rural focus?
With a rural focus, when it's really is going out there and spending time.
I'm sorry, name for the record.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Madam Director,
Tracy
thank you.
Larkin. And when we go out there, it's actually by paying attention earlier, we can partner better. We actually, in the long run, the partnerships are better. We can do, even if it's small projects going in the long run, I really consider a big bang, a return on investment out in the areas, listening to them, knowing what's coming in the areas, knowing what development is suddenly coming in, and being aware of that, and bringing that back to headquarters and coordinating it with them. That constant communication is hugely beneficial, and it's a two-way street.
Thank you. So does the department not currently have that communication between the different areas and the central office?
We have some communication. We have.
I'm sorry, name for the record.
I'm sorry about that. Tracy Larkin, for the record. When we go out, we have yearly, we have county, we go out and meet yearly on the counties, but it's usually very much at a staff level. It's very focused on, here are what the planning needs, here's what, it's very technical, kind of more in nature, and it comes back. It's not really listening and hearing what's going on in the town. That's the part that I'm interested in really getting back.
Okay, thank you for that. That was very enlightening. That's a little bit shocking, but it's good to know. So I want to switch to the rest facility improvements. This is one of those, it seems like, ongoing items where we continue to be over budget and behind schedule. So I know that during the last session, we had estimated costs of $37.4 million for the 3 facilities. Now the projection for the 3 facilities is $47.7 million, so that's about a $10 million or 27% increase. And it seems like we're only focusing on the Biwawi facility. So I guess, first of all, can you just provide a little bit of additional background? How much funding did the legislature allocate for the rest facilities last session, and how much was spent?
Felicia Denny, for the record. I'm sorry I didn't bring that information with me, but we can absolutely provide that.
Thank you. That would be great. And then, what was the estimated timeline for the completion of these rest facility upgrades that was provided to the legislature last session? And what is the latest now? It seems like the plan is to get Biwawi done during this upcoming biennium. It's not exactly, I mean, it looks like we're not putting funding forward to complete the other 2 facilities, so that will be at some point in the future, but do you have any estimate right now of when you think that will be?
Our lead architecture is coming up on it to answer it, but it is often been delayed because it is all state funding. And when the state funding is short in other areas, that it is deemed more immediate. And that is a major reason that they're delayed, but Ross can answer more.
Good morning, Ross Baker for the record, B-A-K-E-R. Director Larkin basically encapsulated it. Because it's state funding, the Trinity and Miller's rest areas have been deferred. And at this time, there's not a clear date for when construction would begin on those. Miller's is capable of being built. The plans are complete. It's ready to go. Biwawi is in the same boat. And so upon funding availability, we expect construction to take approximately a year.
Thank you. And I guess, again, I'll just be interested in that follow-up information. Again, I know that, we're having some difficulties, but again, we knew that we were facing significant construction inflation and other things. And so, I'm just trying to better understand, if we were putting money towards planning and trying to advance these projects, and what we envision that timeline looking like 2 years ago versus now, where it looks like we're going to get one of them done and the other two are on hold for, I guess, the foreseeable future until the financial picture improves. And then the other thing I saw is that the cost for the Biawawi project, I think, is $20.3 million, and it looks like the budget recommends $18.5 million. So can you just, especially considering the changes in construction costs we've seen, explain how you determine that $18.5 million will be enough to ensure that the Biawawi project is completed?
Ross Baker for the record. There is some remaining budgetary authority from the current biennium that's foreseen to be balanced forward.
You have more, Chair?
I do. And then can you just talk a little bit about the Biawawi project in particular, and obviously when that's down and being worked on, there's going to be an impact. How will you work to minimize the impacts to travelers during that project?
Ross Baker for the record. You're correct. So the rest areas, it's actually 2 rest areas. It's one location, but there's not a ramp across the highway travel direction. So it's one direction dedicated each to the east and west direction on I-80. And phasing will be negotiable with the contractor. We will have to take at least one direction completely down at a time. Because of the way the power and water feeds work, there could be interruptions to the other direction as well, though it might not be a complete interruption. But we plan to work with the public information personnel at NDOT to be actively putting out notices to travelers to keep them updated with respect to closures.
Thank you for that information and for your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Assemblymember Brown May, I believe you have a question.
I do. Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, if you don't mind. First, Director, I'm going to say I'm having a bit of a hard time hearing you today. It's probably me. I do have a bit of a stuffy head, but if you would speak a little louder, that would be very helpful for me today. I'm going to switch gears. I would like to ask a little bit about the fueling system upgrade. If I go back and I look at some of the background materials, you talked a little bit about the number of fueling sites that have been completed and the number of sites planned. I believe, though, we started this project in the 78th legislative session back in 2015, and I don't remember when you came back to Nevada, so let me just first apologize, right? Like, I don't know exactly how much of this comes from your leadership. But the original NDOT project was supposed to do the fueling system upgrade, it's my understanding, with about $16 million over a 4-year period, right? From 16 to 19. But now we're looking at, in the report you gave today, a completion of this project in 2030. And it looks like the governor is expected or allocating an additional $14.5 million over the 25-27 biennium for the 54th site, right? So I'm a little confused as how a 4-year project now is like seems like a really
Tracy
almost a
Larkin for the
20-year
record.
project.
I remembered.
Why? Can you tell me why? Why did we go
Yes,
from a 4-year project to an extended
The first
project?
question is, I returned 2 years ago. I just hit my 2-year anniversary. I was out of the state for 2 years. But when it started, there was, and I'm going to let Ross jump in a few minutes because he oversees that project. Oh, actually, it's equipment. But a lot of it is when we went out, there was a number of leaking tanks that were not anticipated in the original. There is a lot more actually cleanup, remediation that needed to be done at the different sites. There are other just aspects of from the original estimate of what the needs would be to actually just go in. I think the original was more of, we're going to go in and replace the pumps. They had the old keys, barrel keys that you turn to get in them, modernizing them as time goes by, where you actually use cards. You have to use a card to fill up your tank. So all these things that took additional funding and just increased, the project just became much bigger than originally anticipated. And Ross, if you have.
Can I jump in if you don't mind just for 1 second? Pardon me, is that all right, Chair? Thank you. So I'm curious to know, you talked about leaking tanks. Was there remediation done with Department of Agriculture? Is that where inspections, like, are there reports about that?
Ross Baker, for the record. Yes, the remediation has to go through the Division of Environmental Protection. It's overseen by certified environmental managers, and yes, there are reports over all remedial items, yes.
So there was a replacement, Tracy Larkin for the record, there was a replacement of tanks. All the tanks are now put above ground, easier to get into, more, they're heavier construction, they're double than what the original ones were planned. So it's really is just the additional remediation, the replacement of tanks, and the other things associated with it.
Thank you for that. So what I'm hearing you say is that we have improved the project by investing now in above-ground tanks as opposed to underground tanks, so we won't have to have that remediation problem later. I'm seeing head nods, so that's really good. Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, I have a follow-up if that's all right. Thank you so much. So given this project's been going for so long, like 10 years, and we only have about 58% of the fuel sites replaced to date, can you talk about how did you come to the calculation that the project would be completed by 2030?
Ross Baker, for the record. The replacement is not equivalent among sites. So most of the sites that have been replaced are, you could call them heavy fixers, and the ones that have been deferred to later in the program, so many of the ones that remain are much less profound in scope. So that's one piece. Another piece is at this point in the program, as you mentioned, enough time has gone by and enough work has been done that we have better information to understand the cost and the time frame that remains for completion.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Senator Titus?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and go to a little different budget. So I'm asking questions on E550, which is information systems. So might want to switch out there. So you did submit, thank you. So you did submit some system enhancements for that. And so I need you to explain the need for the various IT systems enhancements, included in that budget, E550.
Tracy Larkin for the record. We have our Chief of IT, Jeremy Brown, who's in the South.
Well, I'm glad we can put you to good use there since you've waited there all morning.
Good morning. Jeremy Brown, Chief of Information Technology Division for Department of Transportation, for the record, JERAMIE. BROWN. So in that budget category, we have a large number of systems that are reaching end of life and end of support that we're replacing. Thankfully, not all of them are due for replacement at the same time because we simply wouldn't have the manpower or man hours to replace all of them in a single biennium. So we're spreading the costs across multiple bienniums to keep costs as low as possible and complete the most urgent replacements each budget cycle. These replacements are necessary to keep NDOT in compliance with state IT security policy and standards and the Center for Information Security controls mandated by NRS 603A. So when we look at the replacements that we're projecting, we're looking at when do they actually come under end of support. And when I say end of support, that means that the manufacturer is no longer providing updates to that application. They're no longer providing security updates. So when those go out of support, it does leave NDOT vulnerable to cybersecurity incidents. So we're trying to prevent those.
Follow up, Madam Chair. So are you using your legacy system, Cobalt systems? What are you using?
It's a variety. Some of these systems are Windows-based. Some of them are Linux-based. And so when we look at why they need to get replaced, it's really a matter of the infrastructure they were originally built on. Does that manufacturer still support that particular version of the software? Do they support that iteration of hardware that they're on? And what does that mean for us? And then how do those applications integrate into the overall infrastructure and ecology or the ecosystem at the NDOT network? So can we leverage the data that's in them for other applications to help us make data-driven decisions? So when the director and the deputy directors are looking at particular sets of data, how easy is it for them to get that data and correlate it to other elements within our environment? So we're looking at all of those things and making sure that we're making smart choices in which ones we're going to upgrade that particular biennium, and what the impact is overall for the department.
Follow up, if I might, Madam Chair. So you mentioned, thank you for that, because that led me into my next question, which is, so what additional IT systems or enhancements are you anticipating in future biennium, in the past beyond the 25-27 biennium then?
Jeremy Brown, for the record. This is an ongoing cycle. I wish that I could say that, we were going to replace these things and then we would be done. Unfortunately, in the information technology space, that's just not a realistic expectation. And so this is an ongoing issue for us. As systems age and as vendors decide they're no longer going to support that, we have to find a replacement. We do our best to project out those replacements. And we do. I think we do a pretty good job of that. Unfortunately, we also have instances where a company will simply go out of business. They'll declare bankruptcy and go out of business, and it's a system that at NDOT we rely on for particular aspects. One example is Mandley, that helps us manage the roadway infrastructure. It does, the vehicles drive around, they do scans and keep us apprised of the condition of the roadways. That company went out of business. And so we have to find a replacement so that we can continue those operations.
So you mentioned in the comment, if I might, Madam Chair, that you wouldn't have the personnel now to do the programs that you would needed. So you have to kind of do these at steps. Unfortunately, you're not discussing something like the phase projects that I'm hearing on this road construction stuff, where you don't have the manpower and you don't have the money.
No, Jeremy Brown, for the record. No, ma'am. What I'm talking about is if we tried to replace every single legacy system at NDOT all in the same biennium, that is unrealistic. We only have so much staff. We only have so much time. So what we do is we plan out which ones we're going to replace and make sure that we have the resources available, the personnel available, and the time available to get that done within that biennium.
All right, because you said in one of your ones, automatic vehicle location and telemetric system, phase 1. And so I'm always worried about these phases now. And are you going to be able to complete phase 2, phase 3, as opposed to just doing phase 1?
Jeremy Brown, for the record. Yes. So when we plan these out, we look at what that phase is and then how much we're going to get done, what the completion of that phase is going to give the department as far as capability and data and all of that. And so when we complete these phases, it provides a complete set of functionality. And so each phase is not dependent on the previous phase. Well, some phases are dependent on a previous phase getting completed, but each phase as it's completed provides that full set of functionality.
Great. Thanks for that reassurance. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the questions.
Thank you, Senator. Chair Watts?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to switch directions again and want to talk a little bit about contracting. I think, as you're aware, there's been some issues that have gotten the attention of a lot of concerned citizens, as well as the media. In February 2023, the NDOT board approved an $11 million contract to Uprise Fiber via consent agenda, and it's now pretty apparent that a $9 million advance on that state contract is now missing, and the project is not complete. So I was wondering if you could give us some information about the standard practice for these contracts to be developed, vetted, and presented for approval to the NDOT board.
Tracy Larkin for the record. That particular one is, I can't speak much about that project because it is under litigation, and so I can't speak to the project. As far as the vetting, there was a year of negotiation before that came to the board. That was my very first board meeting. But typically, we go before we brief each member of the board. And it's a one-on-one briefing. We go with all the either contracts, agreements, and we go through them one by one. Some of the larger projects and things are done over a year. I mean, they might be like, we did a presentation at the board meeting yesterday on actually the I-15 design study going on there, going through the elements. It is in process now, and the intent would be that on very large projects that as we hit significant phases or changes, that would also be brought to the board in the director's report, and then again on the one-on-ones when we have briefings on them. Obviously, depending on the geographic or what the project is, there are multiple ones. Different board members may have different levels of interest, and we provide any additional information as requested, but we always make sure that there is the base level.
Thank you. And then, so I was going to ask if the Uprise Fiber contract followed that process that you laid out as kind of the standard procedure. Can you speak about that, or can you not say because of the pending litigation?
Tracy Larkin for the record. It's difficult for me to say that because, again, I had just returned. I was not here during that portion of it, and you're talking about February of 23. I started January 17th of 23. But so I would be very surprised if it did not follow a typical part of briefings.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just kind of following up with this, and I recognize that when it comes to this particular contract that you probably are limited in what you can talk about. So I would like to talk a little bit more about the contracting process. I know that your agency has submitted a bill, Senate Bill 77, that kind of also talks about contracting. So I think it's appropriate to kind of figure out who the NDOT board consists of. And so I just want to be clear. So the NDOT board that has to approve these contracts, just contracts generally, including like the Uprise Fiber contract, that's made up of Governor Lombardo is on that board. Is that correct?
Correct.
I just want to make sure I'm getting this all correct. Lieutenant Governor Anthony is also on that board. Is that correct? Okay. You're nodding yes. I just want to make sure that we get that for the record. Controller Matthews is also on that board?
That is correct.
Okay. And then there is a representative from each of NDOT's 4 districts, and they are also compiled that board. Is that my understanding? Is that correct?
There is a member that represents the Northwest, like District 2, a member that represents the rural area, and 2 members that represent the Las Vegas area.
Okay, so there are 4 members total making up those 3 geographical areas. Is that
correct?
Is that correct understanding? To your knowledge, if any of those board members had issues with any contracts, not just the Uprise contract, but any other contracts, is there an ability, do they reach out to staff to express any concerns they have about those contracts prior to them voting to approve those contracts?
Tracy Larkin for the record, yes.
And I'm going to ask, and I don't know if you can answer, but when it was respect to this Uprise contract, did the governor, the lieutenant governor, the controller, any one of those district representatives, did any of them express any concern to you all before their approval of that contract?
On February 1, I simply cannot answer that question.
But they have the ability, if they wanted to, in other
Correct.
types of contracts, to like express that interest.
Tracy Larkin, for the record, yes, they do have the ability to ask for additional information. They can ask, they can ask any question they want on them.
And typically, I'm assuming they would reach out to you all to answer any questions that you had before they would approve any contract.
And yes, they would. And they
Na-
also have the,
name.
Tracy
I'm
Larkin,
sorry.
for the record.
My bad, sorry. I got into cross-examination mode. I'm sorry about that. No, I know, I went lawyer on you, so I apologize for that. But I just wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity for these board members, before they approve contracts, to have those conversations, get any questions answered by. And I'm assuming staff would, if there were issues or they had concerns, they would probably bring that to the attention of the governor, lieutenant governor, controller, and other representatives.
Tracy Larkin, for the record, the board packet is sent to the board members. They have the opportunity anytime if they have a question about a project. The board packet is sent out approximately 10 days ahead of them before it's posted, so that they have an opportunity to see it before we brief them. We then go in, there's one-on-one briefings. There's usually at least 2 members of the front office with each board member that goes in. And then they can not only answer questions about the packet, but if they have other questions in general, maybe how a project is going, or if they have a concern, or if they're passing on a concern from other agencies or something that's been reported to them. If many times the board will also receive questions just in general to the board, and those are passed on to us. And so that we can, many times it's just, can you take care of this or look into this? Or we heard a complaint here, can you address this? So some of it is just a back and forth. Those board members definitely have our number. They do know how to get a hold of us, and then we do reach out on a regular basis. And they'll also, frankly, tell us when they're not as pleased or they want to hear more.
Okay. So there's not a circumstance where you would tell the governor, no, we're not going to answer those questions, or no, you can't pull this item from a consent agenda?
No, that is not something I'm going to do, Tracy Larkin, for the record. But, and they have pulled, over the years. It's not often, but they do pull items out from the consent agenda. Admittedly, in the last several meetings, there have not been a lot on the consent agenda. But yes, they have that opportunity. And large projects, so if we're talking about the North Valleys and something like that, those would receive, even before we put in, we generally do a very large presentation going over the specifics of the project.
So larger projects have even more oversight for the board to give them assurances on these projects before they approve them.
Tracy Larkin, for the record, we try to make sure that when we have the large projects, and it would be like Neon Phase 2, it would be the I-15, it would be Brightline, it would be that. Large projects, we try to give interim ones coming up. We already did one for the I-80 East project going in, of where the phasing is now, what the current schedule is planned to be, kind of in general. Obviously, it's got a lot more, construction wouldn't be anticipated to begin for another 2 years, but we want to get them prepped so they're aware of the scope of the project, they have an idea of the estimate of the project, the way it might be delivered, in phases, or an alternate design, or anything like that.
And Chair, may I ask one last question, or kind of a series of questions? I know that in our world, a lot of the agendas are prepared, and even during IFC meetings, a lot of things are pulled at the direction of staff. Is it your agency that pulls together those consent agendas and makes recommendations to the board of what might be included on those agendas for approval?
The actual items, like the specific consent agenda, our consent agenda is contracts, agreements, right-of-way actions. Those are pretty much the 3 items on the consent agenda. There would be a separate item if there's any legal issues that would be put out. They will often, what is usually is, the director's report is generally what I put in, although at times I've been requested to prepare a certain presentation. We do also ask many times we've been trying to give them more information, sorry. They are interested in more in-depth, we've been giving more presentations. Like I said, we talked about the Ely project this last week. We talked about the previous one, we talked about I-80 West. We've talked about different, like it might be an architecture project, whatever. We do try to get them more involved and also on many things that many people aren't aware of what we do, which might be like the One Nevada plan on the planning process. It might be what we actually do in aviation. Most people don't realize that we inspect, all the, other than McCarran and Harry Reid, we inspect all the airports across the state, what we do. So I'm
No,
just trying
that's
to.
very helpful. And I just wanted to kind of understand that. But just like we do in the legislature, I mean, the buck stops with us. If we want to pull things or if we want to approve things or, the responsibility of like the decisions that we make on a consent agenda, for example, ultimately fall on us as they would on the board. Is that correct?
That is, Tracy Larkin for the record, that is correct.
Thank you. And thank you, Chair, for your indulgence.
Thank you, Senator. You want to jump in, Assemblymember Dickman?
Thank you, Chair. Could you just remind me again how long you had been in your position when that was approved?
3 weeks. Tracy Larkin for the record.
So, and the lieutenant governor and the controller had been in their positions, what, about a month?
I don't remember exactly the date, but Tracy
Approximately.
Larkin, I'm sorry.
Approximately.
Tracy Larkin for the
So
record.
all the background work and advice would have been done previous to that, correct?
That is it, but you're making me uncomfortable talking about this particular project.
Okay, I just wanted to get that on the record. I mean,
Fair enough.
it was done before. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Assemblymember Brown May?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks. I just have a contracting question, if you don't mind. Is it common for us to advance funds of that nature, right? Like it looks like 80% of the funds for the project were advanced in this instance. Is that common practice for us in contracting?
It's not, Tracy Larkin for the record. No, it's not common. But again, I'm uncomfortable simply because I honestly don't know what I can talk about the project and not because it is under litigation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And certainly it's not my intention to make you uncomfortable. I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV. Right, I don't. I was just really curious to know if that was standard contracting. I know that we work through the purchasing division relative to how do we do contracting. Do you know, was this vendor a previous vendor in the state? Did we have a history with this vendor? Any idea?
Tracy Larkin for the record. I do not know the answer to that question.
Thank you, Assemblymember. That kind of triggered a couple of other questions, and I absolutely respect that there are areas you can't go in, right? And I certainly understand that. So I'm just going to ask about some standard, right, things and just kind of see where we are. From doing a little bit of research, I understand that Uprise, they agreed to provide a schedule of construction and milestones and so on. Is that standard for contracts? Is that standard that the vendor agrees on the front end to provide some milestones and timelines and those types of things? Does that typically happen?
Tracy Larkin for the record, and I'm sorry if this seems like I'm bifurcating this. In this particular instance, Uprise was a grantee for a USDA grant and on there. But other than that, I'm not going to speak specifically to Uprise, but typically a contractor, when we get together, an award is put out, we would work together on what the schedule is. Generally, that is already generally predetermined beforehand, that you'll be looking at a notice to proceed at a certain date. All the other pre-construction activities would be expected to get back from the contractor. So if we were to award a contract to Granite or RHB or something like that, when the contract was awarded, they would get together, do the pre-construction activity. There'd be a pre-construction meeting to go over the specifics where they would be looking at the schedule, the estimate, the notice to proceed, and so on. That would be very common.
No, I appreciate that, and again, I appreciate that line, and certainly not trying to get you to cross that. What is, again, standard contracts? What is the standard result or consequence, so to speak, when a contractor deviates from that agreement that was made in the pre-construction meeting?
Tracy Larkin for the record, and we might get into too far into the construction part where I might need to pull someone else up on.
It's okay, you can phone a friend. It's okay.
I'm not sure we have one here today. But normally there would be liquidated damages on some or against the, and those would be outlined in the agreement or the contract up front.
So what so there is something that happens that should happen. It should be baked in at the beginning.
Correct.
Agreed
Tracy
to,
Larkin
I'm
for the
sorry,
record.
agreed to
Yes.
at the beginning.
Correct.
Okay, on, if you can answer this, any idea, because I know you've been there 10 minutes when all this went down, so I certainly get that. But any idea when it came to the attention of NDOT that these requirements in the contract were not being met?
Tracy Larkin for the record, ma'am, sorry, I really can't answer those questions.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. No, not at all. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay. I know it's a tough situation. Thank you. Chair Watts, you have a question?
I do. Thank you. So I guess my question is, my colleague Senator Nguyen asked a lot of questions about the process on the front end. I think it was very informative for us on the interactions between staff and board when evaluating these things. I kind of want to loop around to the back end if there is an issue. So building off Chair Taylor's questions, what does the engagement with the board look like, right? So it's my understanding, right, is that after a contract would be approved, that the department is involved in some of the oversight of ensuring that some of these deliverables are being met and that things are being that are moving forward. So if there is an issue, is the NDOT board generally notified?
Tracy Larkin for the record. It depends on what the issue is. If it's a significant issue, then yes. And at different times, it might be different board members depending on where their particular focus area is. So on ongoing ones, they would generally, yes. I mean, it's kind of a general, but again, it would depend on the issues. There are some construction things that come up that are really kind of relative. Generally, when there are delays, if there's a major delay, then it would be, and it might be just in conversation in the briefing, it's delayed and it's delayed because of this.
Thank you. And it sounds like some of those may come up in briefings or direct conversations. Does anything about that ever come back onto an agenda, even for discussion at meetings of the board?
Generally, if it's a construction issue, I mean, many things change during construction. You might find different ground conditions. Maybe it's just site conditions were different than what was anticipated, or they started to dig and that changed. Those are just considered part of a regular construction project. They were recorded, they're definitely documented, they're putting in there, so any deviation of the plan or any deviation to the budget would have to be documented and in the records.
Thank you. And then what about in the instance of, not adjustments, but failure or potential fraud or other criminal activity? How would that, would that ever, is that something that ever comes before the board in an official capacity?
If it was a legal situation, it would be a closed meeting with the board between counsel and client.
Okay, so.
Tracy Larkin for the record.
Yeah.
I missed that one. Thank you.
Thank you. And so, so it sounds like then when there is a very significant issue that the board would be briefed, and then if there's a legal issue, then that's a closed session meeting.
Tracy Larkin for the record. It would depend on what the legal issue was. Some things are like if it's under litigation and There might be some general reporting of just the status of the case. In the case that you're referring to, it would be a closed meeting.
Okay, thank you. And then, yeah, I think that's probably as far as I can go with general questions, because I feel like based on that, there's probably no additional information that we can get from the department about the details of the failures here. I guess the only other question I would ask is what engagement might there be from the department or the board outside of litigation in addressing, significant problems in the execution of a contract? So, for example, before it gets to litigation, but let's say money's gone out the door, it's been determined that work has not been performed. What's the role that the department plays in trying to address that? And is there any role that the board would play prior to getting to the point of potential legal action?
Tracy Larkin for the record. Depending on how things progress in anything, it would be, we would normally be talking internally to any lawyers if things were considered, an issue was coming up. And then it would be, is this alleged or is this real? Has it been determined? And what steps would be? Normally we would talk with the attorney's office if there was an issue that looked like it might be a litigation or a legal issue. Significant problems would be briefed with different board members, and again, it would depend on what the issue actually was. And I'm not sure I'm completely answering your question, but I am trying.
Thank you, Director Larkin. I just want to ask a couple of financial questions generally. I certainly want to be respectful of your spot. Generally, what kinds of financial projections does NDOT build into the contract? Milestones, anything like that from a financial standpoint, generally.
Tracy Larkin for the record. The financial projection should be in there. I mean, as the contract progresses, it could move faster or slower depending on different things, different aspects could be. Mm-hmm. So generally, in the project, there are milestones, and those are generally met, but it might be whether it's on the critical path method, path forward is of specific areas. There might be other areas where maybe something came up or an opportunity came up where they could advance something faster, and it might be an obstacle came up where maybe there's a utility conflict that hasn't gone through, we're slowed down a certain part. Mm-hmm. Would you like to add more?
Felicia Denny for the record. The vast majority of our projects are design bid build projects, and so we've laid out what all the components are, the projected cost for those components, and we have construction folks on site that will look and see what's been done, and will pay based upon the progress and of the contractor, and they also do vigorous testing and inspections to ensure that the work is done properly. And so typically we'll have a number of working days in our contracts that will look at how many working days we think something will take to get done. Of course, there's always the unknowns with the weather or maybe a site condition or something like that. But typically we'll progress with that. And when we have a multitude of projects going, if one's ahead, usually another one's behind, frequently they'll offset each other, and that will kind of help us. It's easier to project when you have more projects versus just one, typically. And I hope that information helps respond.
Yes, Assistant Director Denny, that was very helpful. So I'm trying to get an idea, and I'm getting close. Do you ever build into generally, right? ever build into the contracts that we have with our contractors or vendors some kind of clawback clause or something to restrict some reimbursement, something that kind of protects us, right? Protects the state from having large losses on contracts and whatnot. Are any of those things typically built into the contracts?
Tracy Larkin for the record. I'm going to have someone who's very much more familiar with the construction part of it give you that information.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Where's the phone a friend? Who's?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to provide it to you. I don't have a person here.
Oh.
I'm afraid he's at the Board of
Oh,
Examiners.
okay, that's a follow-up. Okay, I was like,
I'm sorry.
where is he? Where is he or she? Okay, no, thank you. If you would.
I'm sorry, we split between different meetings today.
Oh, no, that's
so-
okay. No, understandable. No, if you wouldn't mind providing that. I just want to see do we build in anything that helps protect us? Right?
I mean,
So-
yes, Tracy Larkin for the record, there are built-ins in there when it goes forward. Like I said, there's liquidated damages if something isn't done right. There are parts where if something is not constructed properly, there are things in there where they have to remove it, which is why, as Felicia mentioned, that we have inspectors and then construction personnel managing on-site the different projects. So there are parts in there where if, we have fuel escalation, different causes too, where if you use less, then we actually get reimbursed for some. There's some where we pay more because it was going out. So there are a lot of different things in there. So yes, to protect if the construction isn't done properly, that's basically it. If construction done properly, or if it's not done in the time frame expected, there might be working days, and there's a cost for working days lost on there. So I'm speaking very general, but I can have someone provide more specific information. But do you want to add anything?
Felicia Denny for the record. My phone a friend texted me and reminded me of something that we do also hold back a retention. And we will also sometimes have bonding as well. We also do pre-qualifications of contractors to ensure that the companies that are bidding are well qualified before we even entertain them bidding on a contract.
I appreciate that. That helps me a lot. So thank you to the phone a friend who's listening. I appreciate listening or watching or in the building and didn't want to come forward, whatever the case may be. I appreciate that. And I believe, Senator Nguyen, you'd like to have a question?
Yeah, I just, there were some questions that Chair Watts had asked you that I just kind of wanted to follow up with. You had talked about, sorry, let me go back to my notes here. You had talked about some of these closed door meetings. Are they agendized?
Tracy Larkin for the record, and we went very closely because we've only had one since I've been back, and it is in the NRS, looked very closely. It wasn't a closed door, it is actually a meeting. And it is a meeting between the client, NDOT, and the attorney, the AG's office. And so at a meeting like that where everyone gets fully briefed, they can ask all the questions they want in there. It is not, and again, I asked several times because I was more familiar with, you adjourn from one, you get into a closed, you go back in. But was assured by several lawyers, because I asked more than one, that this was appropriate.
And then just kind of following up with that, obviously we spent a good time determining who that board was and the makeup of that board. If any of those board members wanted to publicly agendize any item, could they do that at any time? Could they request that, I should say?
Tracy Larkin for the record, board members can ask that an item be agendized. That it would depend on, again, with the governor also blessing on that. But generally, any request we've received, we have put on.
And are there regular set monthly meetings or quarterly meetings? How often?
It's monthly meetings.
Monthly meetings. So if the board discovered that subcontractors were not being paid in November of 2023 just hypothetically, they would have that potentially at November, December, January, February, they could have agendized this in a public hearing at any time if they requested it.
Tracy Larkin, for the record, most likely they would have called us directly ahead of time. It would have been a discussion, and if it was deemed to be an issue or more than, like if it was a specific to a job, it might be something that was taken care of elsewhere. If it was considered to be an item that needed to be more broadly broadcast, that would be something that would be put on the agenda.
Okay, and so any of the board members would have that ability to agendize a public item?
They have the ability to certainly to request that an item be agendized.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Chair Watts, you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Chair. And we're gonna turn the page. And I do want to revisit some of the bonding questions. I know some of my colleagues asked a little bit about that before, and as well as some of the major projects, and you discussed just the difficulties that we're having in terms of figuring out how to manage these projects. You discussed the Henderson interchange and the commitment to get something done, the need for it, but also that bids came in double the expected price tag, and the difficulty on that. So it does look like in the bond construction account, the recommendation is for $85 million in bonds pledged with highway fund revenue, and then $75 million in bonds pledged with fuel revenue indexing. And I think the fuel revenue indexing, because that's Clark County, was indicated that it is being put forward towards the Henderson interchange project. So can you just talk to us a little bit more about that, given the trouble that we've seen in terms of the costs for these projects, how things look, because the plan is to issue those bonds, and just kind of talk about that and the funding mix that will be used from those bonds to try and address project needs, given kind of the conversations that we had before.
Tracy Larkin, for the record. I'm going to start, and then I'm going to let Felicia jump in with more specific on bonds. You mentioned the FRI bonds. Yes, it is Clark County, which means any revenue that is generated from those bonds is used in Clark County, and it's on the projects, and only in Clark County on projects there. We did generally, the last one, we did not ask for the full amount, because that was after when the Henderson Bowl was canceled. It was while we still were looking at for some bonds for other projects. Also did not feel at that time that it would be appropriate to ask for the full amount we originally. And I think, as Felicia indicated before, when bonds come up, it was, we usually will ask for their permission to do the bonding, and then we will confer with the Treasurer's Office and the Bond Council, again, to make sure we're not overextended in that part. And then after that, I'm going to let Felicia go more specific on the bonding parts.
Felicia Denny, for the record. You had asked about funding mix. What NDOT typically does is we put a priority on federal funds, of course, and try to expend those first. We try to use the most difficult federal funding to use first, as it comes in different, I'll call it different silos, each program with its own requirements. So we try to use the most difficult federal funding first to leave the more flexible funding last. And then we'll also look at our state funds availability. We'll also reach out to our local partners if sometimes they'll decide that they want to help us out with the project and provide some funding, and that's always welcome. And last but not least, we look at our state funds and the feasibility of bonding. And then, as Director Larkin mentioned, we look at our engineer's estimate versus bid awards. And if there's a big discrepancy, then sometimes we'll have to defer a project, maybe rephase it, and look at how we're going to proceed.
Thank you for that. And could you talk specifically about this Henderson interchange project, what the phasing looks like, what changes we might expect from moving to a design bid build process, and how much with this $75 million, like, are we going to be able to, as well as that funding mix of other sources, are we going to be able to complete phase one of the interchange project?
Tracy Larkin for the record. I don't know what the phases are yet. We are working with the city of Henderson, and we have our project management looking at whether it's improvements to Lake Mead Boulevard first, an extension of some of the work they're doing on the 215, or looking at the aspect what specific as what would be the most impactful phase to move forward with first. So I don't have the answer of what that actually looks like. We're still going in conversations on that.
Thank you. And then, obviously, we ran into obstacles with this project. So if we run into similar obstacles where it looks like it's going to be so we don't currently kind of know what phase one's going to look like and what the price tag is going to be and if the money is going to be there to do it. So what do you have in mind for the use of those FRI bond proceeds in Clark County if an issue arises with moving forward with the Henderson Interchange project?
There is also some other projects going on in Las Vegas. You have a list of it?
Felicia Denny for the record. Two projects that we're potentially looking at are the Via Nobila and possibly Neon Phase 2 right-of-way. But I'm going to quote a former assistant director of administration that my crystal ball is covered in asphalt. And so we do our best to project forward and looking out into the biennium, but we also try to be as flexible as we can. We typically will have more than one project that we're planning on per bond, so that if something doesn't move as quickly or moves quicker than anticipated, we're able to meet those needs.
Thank you for that. Actually, Ms. Denny, while I've got you, just I think a quick yes or no. You would use the same kind of process to think about the funding mix for the North Valleys project, right? That's just kind of a general way that you approach project funding.
Felicia Denny for the record, yes.
Great. And then last question on FRI in particular. Do you know if our bonding capacity is being negatively impacted by the uncertainty about the ability of Clark County FRI to continue past the end of calendar year 26?
Felicia Denny for the record. As I previously mentioned, we utilize bond counsel employed by the treasurer. And what we do when we look at bonding is we look at the most recent revenue and map that out. We don't include any future potential increases. And so that any future increases, whether they're in the existing law or potential future law, we don't consider when we determine whether we can afford the bonding or not.
Thank you. So not yet, but could soon become an issue.
Felicia Denny for the record. The bill for FRI funding states that as long as there are bonds outstanding, either NDOT or the county or city, those bonds will keep the rates steady, so they will not decrease as long as those bonds are outstanding. And so it should not impact these bonds. It would just have an impact if we didn't have future growth. It would impact our calculations for what we could potentially bond in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Denny. Assemblymember Mosca?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. I'm going to continue on. Our Chair asked about the US 395 North Valleys project. I just saw in our backup that there is an estimated cost of the $95.4 million of bond funds, but how would the department utilize the remaining $227.8 million in bond and interest authority this biennium?
The department has a variety of projects that are planned to go or that are deferred that we could use the additional bonding on. and I'm looking to see what I have in front of me. There's a potential Phase 2 of 395 Northwest that comes to mind. And there may be other projects as well that we could utilize the funding for.
Follow up, please. And you kind of were answering my second question. Just when you do that, when you plan to fund with the bond sale revenue, how do you prioritize those projects? Like, what is the system that you use for that?
Sandra Rosenberg, for the record. This goes back to our overall prioritization process for our projects. So we look at maximizing the federal funds and then our performance measures and those goals and priorities set out in the One Nevada plan, primarily safety and preservation. But those large projects, often those larger projects are federally funded. Sometimes it requires multiple years of federal funding, and that's a prime example of when we would use bond funding so that we can deliver the project sooner, reduce the risk of inflation while securing those future fundings. Of course, right now we're keeping our ear to the ground on what's happening with those federal funds, so that might be an adjustment. I will also add, this was mentioned earlier, but I want to reiterate, we're asking for the authority to bond. As we get closer to those bond sales, we may adjust the amount we actually sell depending on what we anticipate the program looking like at that time.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Senator Nguyen, I believe you have a question.
Oh, I don't even know if I can fully comprehend this to be able to ask the questions, but I'm going to give it a try. I spent most of the morning learning and distinguishing between subordinate bonds and high priority seniority bonds and senior bonds and all this stuff. So that are some of the questions that I'm going to ask you. In particular, I'm going to kind of shift down to some of the financing that takes place under NRS 373.0675, which requires the fuel revenue indexing funding to only be used to finance projects in Clark County, so where my district is. So where that, I guess, fuel and revenue index funding is currently generated in Clark County. So what steps are NDOT taking to ensure that it does so?
Felicia Denny for the record. NDOT's financial systems, we use a robust chart of accounts to track the various funding in each project. And so we have a special code for those FRI bonds that we use only in those Clark County projects. Our financial management group does the first step to obligate the funding using those codes. And then our project accounting group is a second set of eyes that looks and sees what funding is utilized and would do a double check on that. They also would do a triple check on it prior to any funding being journal vouchered over to be using bonds. Additionally, all our project funding is identified in our STIP, our Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. And so that provides another process to ensure that we're only using that funding in Clark County.
I actually understood the answer and maybe my question. So I appreciate your clarity on that. Kind of getting into some of this, kind of a complex statement and question, I guess. I know that during the last legislative session, bond sale revenue was approved at 3 times the coverage rule. However, in this recommended budget for the 25-27 biennium, it includes bond sale revenue at 2 times the coverage rule. And it sounds like in the documents that you provided to us previously that this was done with, in consultation with the state treasurer's office. So I'm just kind of curious on what those maybe conversations were around with the treasurer's office. Why, knowing that moving from that 3 times coverage or 3 times coverage to the 2 times coverage just means less certainty in the ability to repay. Kind of what the thinking of the governor's office in consultation with the secretary or treasurer on how they came up with, I guess, that change in the rule. So that's my first question. And Chair, if I may ask a follow-up.
Felicia Denny for the record. NDOT's policy prior to January of 2015 was to issue bonds with coverage of 2 times or greater. And so what that means is the pledged revenue, which is gas tax and special fuel taxes, would be at least 2 times the amount of the bond payments. And that's when you take into account new sales plus all sales outstanding. Although our practice was 2 times and our policy was 2 times, we were selling bonds at 3 times and greater coverage. And so our treasurer's consultants suggested that we change our policy to allow for 2 times coverage for subordinate bonds and 3 times or more coverage for senior bonds, meaning that the senior bonds would be paid if there was financial trouble before subordinate. And so they're slightly less risky. When we first sold the FRI bonds, we're selling them, first of all, at the same time as the motor vehicle fuel tax bonds. And so you need to identify one as subordinate to the other. And I believe that first sale, both of them were at 3 times, but were subordinate. Our latest bond issuances, our bond counsel suggested that we sell the FRI bonds at 2 times coverage while we retain the 3 times coverage for the motor vehicle fuel tax bonds. And the reason for the 3 versus the 2 is the consultants felt we'd get better terms on our bonds. Does that answer your question?
It does. I just wanted to confirm that that was done to put us in a better financial position, kind of distinguishing between those 2 types of bonds, the subordinate and the senior, and how they would do. So I appreciate that. That kind of is in the same line. Can you explain how the department's planned sale of those subordinate bonds pledged for repayment with the Clark County fuel revenue indexing proceeds was more appropriate in this circumstance than the sale of the senior bonds? I mean, I realize that the risk isn't really on us as the bond provider, but the bond holder, like the county, seems to potentially have more risk in that sale. So can you kind of describe why that determination was made?
Felicia Denny, for the record, please correct me if I didn't understand the question. Actually, could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
I did. I was all around because, like I said, I'm struggling here to make sure I do it. So can you explain how the department's planned sale of subordinate bonds pledged for repayment with Clark County fuel revenue indexing proceeds was more appropriate than the sale of senior bonds?
Felicia Denny, for the record, the motor vehicle fuel tax bonds, that revenue source, the gas tax, special fuel tax, can be used for projects in any part of the state, whereas the fuel revenue indexing is just for use in Clark County. And so in order to make the best use of those Clark County fuel revenue indexing dollars, when we have projects in Clark County, if it makes financial sense, we'll utilize those FRI dollars. It allows us to leverage those dollars a little more and retain the motor vehicle fuel tax dollars for other projects.
That helps. So does that so that sale of those subordinate bonds allows us to essentially purchase or to obtain more or issue more bonds?
Yes. When we received that fuel revenue indexing source of revenue, it gave us the ability to issue bonds that we may not have done with the motor vehicle fuel tax revenue.
And you kind of answered this already, which I appreciate, but just to follow up on it, you had answered a question I was going to ask about, do the subordinate bonds allow for a greater portion of the fuel revenue indexing proceeds to be pledged by reducing the coverage requirement from 3 times for senior bonds to 2 times for subordinate bonds, which I believe you answered. Does the state pay more in interest for this benefit?
So we recently sold some fuel revenue indexing bonds, subordinate bonds, and also some senior bonds at the same time. So that gives us a kind of a good idea of how we can compare the interest rates for the two. And the difference was quite small. The difference between the two was 0.1% in one instance and about 0.07% in another. So while there is a distinction, it's not very large.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I believe Assemblymember Anderson has a question.
I do. Thank you, Chair. I think I understand as well. I was in the same boat of trying to understand the subordinate bonds. And so why is the department switching to the sale of subordinate bonds when it appears that it is within the 3 times coverage limit? I understand that I think you said the treasurer recommended it. Is that the only reason why, or is there other reasons?
Felicia Denny for the record. Just to clarify, the FRI, the latest FRI bond sold, did not have 3 times coverage. They were 2 times coverage, just greater than, but not quite 3. However, the motor vehicle fuel tax is also pledged as kind of backup coverage, and when you included that, they were well over 3. The idea is that the bond experts believe we would get better terms for our bonds, that we'd sell maybe at a lower interest rate if we had the various 2 different stratifications.
Follow-up, if I may. Thanks. So, okay, moving on. What alternative funding options would the department have available or consider for highway construction projects if that pledge does not come through, especially with the fuel revenue coverage limit for the bonds? What are the other options that are out there?
Felicia Denny for the record. At this time, our bond consultants have not recommended any alternative source of revenue for bonding, and so that's not anything that we've explored at this time.
So quick follow-up. So what happens if it's not quite what you anticipated? Because from the first question, it sounded like there could be better terms, but what happens if it's not?
Felicia Denny for the record. Typically, when we sell bonds, again, with the Treasurer's Office consultants' expertise and the Treasurer's Office helping us out, we'll typically have quite a few bidders on our bonds. And so that's a good and fortunate thing. If we did ever go to issue bonds and we didn't have the bidders or the terms that we anticipated, then we could always decline to make that bond sale.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Assemblymember Brown May.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. More bond questions.
No.
Yes, I'm going to go back to banking school and bonding. Can you just tell me, it looks like I'm looking at inflation versus the cost of projects. Can you tell me what's the rationale for utilizing revenue from bond sales to fund highway projects? Why do we do it?
Felicia Denny for the record. You've pretty much hit the nail on the head as far as some of the benefits of bonding, so thank you. When we're facing inflation in the 20s and the 30%, and we could sell a bond for 3.5%, it gives us the ability to get that project out the door and save some money as far as what we would have paid if we had to defer the project to a future date. But please note that we do always look at the whole picture when determining whether or not to sell a bond.
Thank you. Follow-up, Chair. Thank you. I have a couple more. We're going to do some quick questions. How's that? Quick. Can you talk a little bit about how the current environment and trends in interest rates and inflation support the issuance of bonds? There's one, right? How does the current financial market dictate bonds? And then clarify the funding that has been and would be pledged for highway revenue bonds.
So as far as the interest rate market, we rely on our experts in the Treasurer's Office to kind of take a look at what's going on for us. They'll do some pro forma, meaning projection scenarios, to say this is what you might be looking at. Is it feasible? Is it not feasible? They also help us with our rating agency presentations, and so we really rely on them. Also, I'll note, prior to selling a bond, we do get approval from our Transportation Board as well as the Board of Finance and provide some information to those bodies. And sorry, the second question?
You're doing great. Clarify that the funding has been and would be pledged for the highway revenue bonds.
Oh, the funding that's pledged is gas tax and special fuel tax, and special fuel tax is overwhelmingly diesel tax, and that is the same for the fuel revenue indexing.
Thank you. I just have one last question, Chair, if that's all right. Can you talk about the impacts to NDOT's bond rating and the future issuance of bonds if our highway fund revenues continue to remain flat? What's the impact?
The impact would be that as we have those coverage ratios and rating agencies also look at our financial picture, our ability to issue future bonds is limited by that. And so as our purchasing power shrinks with inflation, it just makes it a little tougher to finance projects.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Chair Watts?
Thank you, Chair. Just one quick thing. So the department does not have any plans to pledge GST revenue for bonds, does it?
Felicia Denny, for the record, not at this time, but we do rely on that revenue for payments for pay-as-you-go projects.
Thank you. I just appreciate that clarity. And then last on wildlife crossings, just looking for some additional clarity on this, right? Understand that no money has been spent out of the budget account yet. It seems like in the budget, no spending is proposed, but, and it sounds like there's a lot up in the air that we don't know for sure that we have the federal grant funding available. But I think if we do, there is a state match component out of that. So if you could just talk about if those things move according to plan, what is the plan to spend funds out of this account related to, let's start with that project in particular.
Nova Simpson for the record. So I'm working as the Wildlife Crossing Program Manager for Department of Transportation now, and ultimately the last year and a half we've spent preparing to kind of spend that money essentially, as you guys are aware, and if we need to provide any additional information on our prior efforts, I'd be happy to do that. So ultimately that appropriation does allow for a variety of purposes and needs, including research, grant writing, et cetera, anything kind of attributed to that. Up to this point, the department has covered those funds, and we've left that $5 million specifically to use for a match in hopes to really improve our opportunities for bringing federal dollars in. But given current situations, we're going to have to start thinking about using those funds for grant writing, for research, some of those other kind of intricacies that apply to creating these kinds of programs. So I do expect to start utilizing that fund for those purposes, given all of the other considerations and uncertainties. Ultimately, we still would like to use it as match, and that's still going to be the goal, is to use a large portion of that, but we will start to utilize that for some of those smaller needs as well.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson, for that. I guess while we're on that, I probably some follow-up about some of the work that you've done, because I believe that you've been working to kind of compile project opportunities. That would be helpful, and it's probably better to just ask for it as a follow-up to also get a sense of the scope of how many projects those are, what the costs would be for those projects, so that we can kind of understand what the overall demand is for that. So I'll just leave that as a request that we can get as a follow-up. But could you talk a little bit about the Coyote Springs Tortoise Crossing project in particular, kind of where things stand, and again, what match might be provided from this account to support that project, assuming it moves forward?
Yes, absolutely. Nova Simpson for the record. So the Coyote Springs project is for desert tortoise. That is under one of our specialists out of Las Vegas. So I don't have all the exact details, but my understanding is there's like 60 crossings. They are existing culverts, but they are 60 modifications that would happen, as well as new tortoise fencing to direct the tortoise to those crossings. Altogether, that's around a $20 million project. to do all those modifications and do all of the fencing. We did have a unanimous vote just a couple weeks back to provide the $1 million match that the department has promised. And then also there's a variety of other stakeholders that have contributed some in-kind work for some of the design and engineering. That's a private company, and I believe also some of the local county as well as like MPOs may have also been. So I do apologize, I don't have all those details. We can provide that as well. And then just to kind of reference what you're talking about for the needs across the state, a very quick number is, if we're looking at large-scale projects, we got a request for 90 different segments of roadway across the state. When we did a inquiry for other agencies, like what are your needs, what do you want? And if we were to do just one of those projects and let's say just one overpass and 2 miles of fencing, 1 mile in each direction, that's the absolute minimum. We're probably looking at $15 to $20 million per project. So if we look at that across the board, it's pretty substantial. Just to do 5 of those projects, we're probably looking at, anywhere from 100 million upwards. So you can see that the need is great, and I'm happy to provide some additional information. We are wrapping up that report right now. We're meeting with a variety of districts in April to kind of prioritize and select 2 for each of our 3 districts.
Thank you. And then what's the latest timeline on when we feel like we will know that we can move forward? And you talked about the $1 million, which looking at this, so I guess the project is overall about 20 million, federal funds 16.8 million, state funds 1 million. So do you plan to utilize money from this account to cover that 1 million if it moves forward?
Nova Simpson, for the record, yes.
Okay, great. And then when do you expect to know, I know this is a challenging question, if we've got the green light on that?
Sandra Rosenberg, for the record. We do not have any indication when a decision will be made about grants that are under review by the administration.
Great. Well, that's frustrating.
We can promise you'll be the second to know.
Yeah. And then last, you did talk a little bit about, in addition to these planning activities, grant writing, are there any other, and I think I know where this is going, but are there any other grant opportunities that are still available that the agency will be pursuing for these types of projects?
I think the grant writing or the grant world is a little uncertain right now on the federal side, but I will continue to dig into other opportunities. I don't know if Sandra has any additions.
Sandra Rosenberg, for the record. Yeah, the whole grant world on the federal side is pretty uncertain right now, but we'll continue to let you know as we hear anything coming out of DC.
Thank you. So is it fair to say that the first focus is completing this project, assuming that we get follow through, and then the next kind of set of activities that would come out of this account would be the ongoing planning, research, and other work, and then additional grants. We're going to probably have to wait until there's some more clarity. Is that kind of a good summary of where things are at with this account?
Sandra Rosenberg, for the record, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Are there any other questions on any of the NDOT budgets? All right, exhale. We are finished with you. Thank you so much. There were a lot of questions, I know.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I would just say Trace Slacker for that, but thank you. But I also want to thank my smart colleagues who came with me.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to thank Director Larkin, Assistant Director Denny, Ms. Rosenberg, Mr. Baker, Mr. Brown, and Ms. Simpson. We appreciate it. Okay, now we're to the final item on our agenda, and that item is public comment. If you would like to make public comment, that number is 475-4499, and the meeting ID is 853-4542-1804. So if there's anyone here in Carson City who would like to make public comments, if there's anyone, I don't see anyone else, well, there may be someone. If there's anyone in Vegas, please come on forward at this time as well. You will have 2 minutes, and please state your name for the record. Go right ahead.
Good morning. I think it's still morning. My name's Craig Madole. I'm the CEO of the Nevada Chapter AGC. Two things I wanted to mention. One, on that Uprise project there was a lot of questions on. The U.S. Department of Agriculture was actually the lead agency for that project, and they held the contract with the contractor in question, and there was a lot of confusion on that. So I just, maybe that's for everybody's education. The other comment I'd like to make is just based on the fiscal responsibility of the proposal we heard today. When the department is sitting here saying we don't have the money to construct and maintain the highways, in my opinion, it's probably not the time to spend $50+ million on new equipment and hire 30 new people. I think maybe those funds are better spent maintaining and constructing the highway, which is the primary responsibility of NDOT. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Madole. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Andrea Corral, ANDREACORRAL. I am with Pinion Public Affairs and represent Pew Charitable Trust. Last year, Nevada took its first critical step in leveraging its initial $5 million appropriation into the Wildlife Crossings account to secure a $16 million federal grant for building these crossings. But we still have a lot of work left to be done. Across the state, there are still dozens of wild collisions hotspots that still need additional resources in order to make our roads safer and also create those important wildlife corridors. Each year, we have a reported 500 wildlife vehicle collisions that cost the public nearly $20 million in damages, medical expenses, etc. And nationwide, this number can total up to $8 billion annually. That being said, wildlife crossings have proven to reduce these crashes by more than 95% when paired along with fencing, protecting not only people, but as well as our wildlife. By building on our momentum and investing in additional crossings, Nevada can enhance public safety, protect its wildlife, and ultimately save millions in taxpayer dollars. These crossings are not just environmental necessity, but a fiscally responsible investment that pays for itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Curl. Anyone else here in Carson City? Seeing none and seeing no one come forward in Las Vegas. AVS, is there anyone on the phone lines who would like to make public comment?
If you'd like to provide public comment, please press *9 to take your place in the queue. Caller with the phone number ending in 051, you may continue.
Okay. Thank you for taking the time. I'm begging you to demand a change in leadership at NDOT. Director Larkin has proven time and time again that
I'm sorry, sir. May we have your name before you get too far, because I'll lose you at the end. Please, your name for the record.
No, ma'am, that's fine. Barry Johnston, Las Vegas.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm begging you to demand change in leadership at NDOT. Director Larkin has proved time and time again she's incapable of managing NDOT efficiently, and it is our economy and taxpayers who suffer the consequences. First, let's talk about the fuel revenue indexing scam, the ballot initiative created by contractors and lobbyists who everyone says was in a romantic relationship with an RTC transportation executive. Contractors promoting FRI misled voters using NDOT and RTC workers to create FRI metal signs with a yellow and black New Jobs, New Roads logo and illegally place them in the center divider of freeways using NDOT labor and hanging signs in public places. None of you elected officials can hang your signs, and I remind you that that was a ballot initiative. Supposedly, contractors reimburse the cost of the campaign signs through Fix Our Roads CC, but where's the accountability? Why did our public agencies get used as political tools? Do any of you understand the index FRI uses to increase the tax? Meanwhile, our roads continue to degrade because Nevada refused its tax on all cars equally. Alternative fuel commercial vehicles like cabs, limos, and other vehicles using propane, natural gas, electric pay far less than gas-powered vehicles, yet they use the same infrastructure and destroy our roads 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The result, funding shortfalls, crumbling roads, and the projects that drag on for years. Speaking of inefficiencies, just 3 hours away in Utah, they replaced a 1.1 million pound bridge in a weekend. Cars were driving on it that Monday morning. Here in Nevada, similar projects like Tropicana take years with lanes restrictions, crippling businesses, and no workers present for weeks at a time, even with lanes still restricted. Utah's motto is keep Utah moving. But under Director Larkin, our motto might as well be slowly but surely, because she repeats it all the time. She has no spark in her step. No one respects her. They run over her constantly. And let's address the elephant in the room. Bogus environmental studies that are being used to keep HOV lanes that the public overwhelmingly opposes. INDOT was ordered to remove them, yet Director Larkin is stalled, hiding behind unnecessary studies. Now with Secretary Duffy in place,
Mr.
we finally have
Johnson,
a chance to eliminate
Mr.
this
Johnson,
red tape.
Mr. Johnson, I'm sorry, sir. Your 2 minutes are up. If you have other comments, we would love to hear them. Please just write them up and send them in to the committee secretary, and she'll make sure all the committee members get it.
Let's get Nevada moving again.
Okay.
We can't allow Director
Thank you so much,
Larkin
sir.
to
Is
be
there
in
another
place
caller,
to continue
AVS?
to destroy Nevada.
AVS, is there another caller?
Yes, Chair. Caller, please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Russell Coleman, RussellKuhlman. I'm the Executive Director for the Nevada Wildlife Federation. I'm here today to say that over the past 20 years, Nevada has lost 70% of our prime sagebrush habitat. Our mule deer population in the 1980s was over 200,000. Today it is estimated at 68,000. Our wild desert sheep are also declining due to drought and not having access to year-round water resources. Our state needs funding to better understand how to provide our wildlife access to these high-quality habitats while maintaining not only our wildlife safety, but our individual safety as well as drivers. Funding wildlife corridor research and crossings is a bipartisan issue across the West, and in a 2024 poll, 80% of Nevadans supported constructing wildlife crossing structures across major highways that intersect with known wildlife migration corridors. This wildlife crossings account is vital in order to receive the necessary resources from the federal government to completely construct wildlife passages. As it was earlier mentioned on today's meeting, the Nevada Department of Transportation was awarded a $16.8 million grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation to build 61 wildlife crossings and install 68 miles of fencing along Highway 93 in southern Nevada to provide safe passage for the Mojave Desert tortoise and other wildlife. That project would not have happened without this account. As it was also mentioned, we use this $1 million from this funding to match the $17 million from the federal government. That ratio cannot be ignored and needs to be used to our advantage. And in closing, though, Nevada Wildlife Federation agrees with 80% of Nevadans, and my organization will always support investing in our state's wildlife for the enjoyment of current and future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. AVS, do we have another caller?
Thank you, Chair. The public line is open and working. There are no callers at this time.
Thank you so much. And thank you again to INDOT for being here. Thank you, committee members. We are adjourned.